Chapter 229. When the huge body wrapped in red light appeared in the valley of the Keren forest, everyone on the scene stopped moving. Whether it was Rodney and Wood who were shouting and waving their hands, or the warrior who was covered in leaves, all the believers of the Church of Strength paused at the same time. After the stiff feeling that made their blood seem to freeze, what followed was an unbearable heavy pressure. In a short moment, almost all the believers of Power Sect knelt on the ground and lowered their heads under the heavy pressure. Only Rodney and Wood, who were high-level extraordinaries, could barely stand. On the other side of the Perseverance sect, all the mercenaries also felt their bodies sink. They were notified in advance and did not panic, but the powerful presence of the Gulandea forced them to look away. Only Cynthia could barely look at this great existence for a while, but the more she observed, the more shocked she was. When one reached Cynthia's level, one's understanding of the gods would be clearer and more accurate. What kind of god, what kind of strength, these could be perceived by high-level extraordinaries. And now, in Cynthia's perception, this huge bloody skeleton was not inferior to the existence of the great mother goddess that she believed in. Double god sacrifice? How could it be? The shock in the woman's heart was indescribable with her eyes wide open. Normally, the ancient gods were harsh. They must be devout to those who could obtain their power. Not to mention 2 part-time jobs, even if they married a woman that they did not like that much, they might lose their god's favor. However, all of this seemed to be ineffective on Luo Ya. Cynthia naturally did not know that the relationship between Luo Ya and Pei Taylor and the others was based on an ancient equal contract. He was the guide who brought them back from their endless slumber. Such a relationship was mutually beneficial and was far from the charity of the gods to the believers. The brown-haired woman lowered her head to look at the boy in front of her. Suddenly, she felt that Luo Ya's strength had become unfathomable. On the other side, the people of Power Sect were completely silent until Wood's voice sounded. "Great existence, please forgive us for being disrespectful to the Son of God." During this hour, Luo Ya learned about the Church of Strength in detail, which was why the followers of the Gulandea had turned into a bunch of beggars. What surprised him was that it seemed to have something to do with the development of the fringe by the House of Sorophia. Because of this, Ari Lisi sympathized with the Church of Strength and strongly condemned the evil forces led by Xia Luote. Big brother, Xia Luote is really a bad woman. While Ari Lisi was attacking, Luo Ya looked at the scale that Rodney gave her and began to communicate with Pei Taylor. Scale of the Serpent Goddess. This so-called sacred object was actually the scale of a serpent with the bloodline of Mother Earth. From Pei Taylor's point of view, it was a relic left behind by a descendant of an unknown number of generations. The king of holy beasts would not take it seriously, but to some extent, it was not completely useless. Countless years after Petra's death, it was not easy to find a medium to carry the power of Mother Earth. The scales of this descendant of the same origin were rare. After Petra's blessing, it could become a powerful curse vessel. It was far from being comparable to when it was in Rodney's hands. It could only rely on a little bit of power after death to command the snakes. Needless to say, Power Sect was very traditional. Their respect and trust for Luo Ya were far higher than Fortitude Sect. Basically, all of them submitted to Luo Ya after meeting him. At that time, they didn't even know Luo Ya's name, let alone his status. Of course, there must be a reason why the Gulandea appeared directly. But even if it was the scale of the serpent goddess that had never been given to the cultists, Rodney and others did not hide it and directly gave it to Luo Ya. This was very commendable. According to Rodney and others, Power Sect's original plan was to set off to find Luo Ya in these few days. It was the first time they engaged in a business of robbery. They usually did not commit any crimes and did not get involved in any trouble. For these words, Luo Ya basically chose to believe after observing Rodney and others' attire. Indeed, with the strength of 2 source rank 3 extraordinaire in Power Sect, if they really engaged in the business of robbery, they would have become rich long ago. However, what Luo Ya cared about was their explanation of the reason for the robbery. "Oh, you're under someone's orders?" "That's right. We agreed to rob the caravan to repay the kindness of taking us in." "I see. But who is the master of the forest?" Is he also a heretic from the fringe? No, about that. Under Luo Ya's somewhat strange gaze, the stammering Rodney and Wood hesitated for a long time. In the end, they could only helplessly answer. The master of the forest is an ancient ent. Luo Ya's eyes widened when he heard the two's explanation. After a series of inquiries, the black-haired young man understood what happened and felt unprecedented helplessness and surprise. Luo Ya had never thought that there would be a day when he would be robbed by an ent. What was even more ridiculous was that the one who ordered the robbery was a Gulen Daya believer. When he learned that the ent who took in Rodney and the others had set his sights on the dozen barrels of disgusting Kadi wine that he transported, he immediately understood the meaning of Ishar Bela's words in the historical fragment. Indeed, it seemed that there was no need for any method. As long as one brought a large amount of Kadi wine into the forest, anyone would be able to encounter the ent. But after thinking about it carefully, no caravan would be willing to transport such cheap and disgusting Kadi wine. It was even more impossible to bring a large amount of wine into the forest. In fact, after the peak of the adventure season, the mountain road to Karen Forest was almost impassable. After understanding these matters, Luo Ya reckoned that the ent named Cade's claim of not drinking Kadi wine for almost 100 years might be true. After explaining his purpose, Rodney and the others who were conflicted about their kindness heaved a sigh of relief. The group of them walked together into the depths of the valley. In the deep forest of the valley, the huge oak tree was as still as ever. It was spring, the trees were sprouting and the birds had also begun their large-scale activities. Karen Forest had also begun its cycle as usual, but Cade's eyes did not open. In fact, one of the secrets of this old ent's long-term survival was staying at home. Chapter 230. When Luo Ya's name Akut entered the dark ear hole, the ancient ent finally found the meaning of this surname in his long memory. After understanding this surname, Cade also completely relaxed. Not an enemy. An old, hoarse voice came from the trunk, causing the monsters and werewolves that were gathering nearby to heave a sigh of relief. All kinds of monsters began to retreat in large batches. Shadows flashed in the darkness of the deep forest, and the number of shining eyes rapidly decreased. The restless werewolves also began to retreat in batches. Luo Ya calmly looked at the rapidly emptying forest, the crimson light on his body gradually dissipated, and the golden snake on his staff also slowly returned to the Hydra staff. A breeze blew, and the valley was calm, as if the countless monsters never came. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Cade. No, this is what I should do. But Akut, recently life is really a lot more interesting. The tall ent sighed, then looked up into the distance. Not knowing if it was an illusion, Luo Ya always felt that Cade's wooden eyes gradually lit up, and the next moment, the ent's voice came again. But before that, cough cough. Young man, do you have wine? Oh, this taste is still so familiar, just like Orson's black soil, it's unforgettable. In the forest of the valley, the huge ent held a wooden barrel and poured pale yellow wine into the tree hole. The hoarse voice had a kind of enjoyment and joy, but the strange metaphor made Luo Ya show a strange expression. When Cade asked Luo Ya about wine, the black-haired boy showed a well-prepared smile. With a wave of his hand, Cynthia and others brought out more than a dozen barrels in one breath. In Luo Ya's opinion, this was enough, but he didn't expect that the ent didn't drink with the roots, but poured it into the hole. But it had to be said that after so many years, more than a dozen barrels of wine were enough for Cade to drink. The Kadi wine really scratched his itch, and Luo Ya had wine, so Cade's story came online. Ishar Bela, I don't know this name, but I know, Queen, because in fact, I am also a member of the Twilight Sage Association. My codename is Recorder, Burp. The ancient ent said with a burp, which made the black-haired boy a little shocked. Luo Ya didn't expect that the Twilight Sage Association would even recruit ents, but it was reasonable that Cade didn't know who Queen was. But why does the surname Akut seem familiar? For this question, the tall ent thought for a long time, and after drinking a mouthful of wine, he let out a hoarse and helpless sigh. It's very simple, because I was a members, Twilight Sage Association, and the first president of the Sage Association, and he is your ancestor, eh? Cade's words made the black-haired boy widen his eyes, and he couldn't help but reveal a dull question. Akit and Ald, this Ent's hearing isn't very good, right? Luo Yue thought so with a face full of doubts. Seeing this, the Ent could only explain. The Ald family, that's the era you call the Second Era, a secret family that supported the Austen Empire, and has been silently maintaining the peace of the human world. The Twilight Sage Association was originally established by them, and they recruited other races to resist various disasters together. But just like the growth of plants, there is a flourishing spring and summer, and there is a withering autumn and winter. The Twilight Sage Association suffered a major failure at the end of the Second Era, and the Austen Empire was destroyed. In order to avoid the pursuit of the Savior's believers, the Ald family was divided into 7, and one of the main branches was the Akit family. Wait, let me take a break first. Luo Yue hurriedly reached out his hand to stop Cade's compressed biscuits, and the black-haired boy rubbed his brows and began to understand the meaning of the Ent's words. What's the situation? The Twilight Sage Association was established by the Akit family's ancestors. And what was the Ald family? He had never heard of such a family in the Austen Empire, and there was no trace of it in the history books. And what was the Savior? Cade, is the Savior some kind of god? Why would his followers hunt down the Ald family? The Savior. I'm not too sure about his identity, he already existed when I was born, but what I can be sure of is that he is not a god. Cade's tree-lined face showed a dignified expression, and said in a low voice that is an ancient sleeping existence, the most terrifying madness and depravity, the destruction of prosperous civilizations and the extinction of mythical races has a lot to do with him. One of the goals of the Twilight Sage Association is to prevent his awakening, but because of my race, I have very little involvement in the affairs of the Sage Association, so I don't know the specific situation. Cade's description of the Savior made Luo Yue couldn't help but feel a chill on his back, but then his gaze shifted. Although the terrifying existence that was still sleeping was terrifying, the enemies in the real world needed more attention, such as the believers. The believers of the Savior, what do you mean? Chapter 231. On top of the tree, Luo Yue, who saw the message from hundreds of years ago, stood on top of Cade in a daze. For a moment, he couldn't react. He reached out and touched the engraving that occasionally flashed with a faint dark golden light. Don't believe in Aikman. What does that mean? The black-haired youth pondered in his mind. Of course, he knew the meaning of Aikman. It was the name of the Austen Empire's royal family. However, the phrase "don't believe in it" was very strange because it basically represented the Akit family. At least in Roy's generation, there was a connection with the Aikman family. To be honest, Luo Yue was very puzzled because Akit territory was not connected to the Austen Empire geographically. When Roy wrote this message, he should only be around the age of adulthood. It was almost impossible for a child of this age to come into contact with the Austen Empire's royal family. Based on the fact that Roy was able to track them all the way to Karen Forest, he should be a meticulous person. Such a person should not have a stereotypical impression of a place that he had never been to just based on books, or even engraved it for future generations. Then, the most likely reason was a fragment of history. Luo Yue muttered to himself. His gaze couldn't help but sharpen. At present, he could only speculate that Roy might have experienced something in the fragment of history. Everything else was too vague. But no matter what, he did receive a message from hundreds of years ago. After reading the message, the youth landed on the ground and didn't know what to say for a moment. He hadn't met anyone from the Aikman family until now, but in the academy next year, he would definitely face this bloodline. On the other side, the tall Ent noticed that Luo Yue had landed on the ground and straightened his body. While drinking, he suddenly remembered something. By the way, is the girl who came here a while ago related to you? What? Towards Cade's question, Luo Yue couldn't help but raise his head and ask. Seeing the youth's surprised expression, the Ent understood. So that's how it is. It seems that she isn't your companion. What's the situation? That was about a month ago. According to Cade, about a month ago, a young lady in full body armor suddenly appeared in Karen Forest. Cade didn't pay much attention to this traveler, but he didn't expect her to come straight to him. It was obvious that the other party had come prepared, and their target was Cade. However, before the slow Tyrant could speak, the girl had already spoken, and the message she conveyed was unusually concise. Be careful, they may have found this place. This was all that the girl conveyed. After that, before Cade could react, the girl quickly left. She is most likely a descendant of one of the Twilight Sage Society's members. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to find me so accurately. As for what danger she mentioned, I don't know. Throughout the long history of the Twilight Sage Society, the Twilight Sage Society has made too many enemies. Luo Ya frowned deeply. Although he was glad that the descendants of the Sage Society members still existed in this world, he was more concerned about the enemy in the message and the safety of the ancient Tyrant in front of him. Cade, what are you going to do? You haven't moved at all for the past month, have you? That's true, but I don't have any other choice because I will be more conspicuous if I leave the forest. Cade sighed helplessly. As a 1,000-year-old Tyrant, it was fine for Cade to hide in the forest. Once he left the valley, he would be truly unique. If he didn't leave the valley, he would enter the land of chaos, and the soil there wasn't suitable for him to grow. In such a dilemma, Cade could only choose to defend himself. For this reason, he had recently gathered a lot of demons in the valley. That was why he was able to put up such a huge formation when Luo Ya came. Regarding the current situation, the ancient Tyrant was helpless, but the black-haired young man widened his eyes when he heard about these troubles. Indeed, in this world filled with humans, a Tyrant would be exposed as soon as he left the forest, but what if the humans transported him out? It was a wonder that a tree could walk on its own, but it wasn't surprising that a human transported a tree. As for where he would be transported to, there was nothing else in the southern mountains of Akut territory, but there were too many trees. If Cade could bring his entourage to live there, the strength of Akut territory would probably increase by leaps and bounds. Cade, if you believe me, how about coming to my territory? Luo Ya thought about it for a long time and felt that it was feasible, so he voiced out his idea. Hearing the young man's invitation, the tall Tyrant hesitated. But, these cursed werewolves, as long as you can control them, you can transport them together, including the demons. But the risk of doing so, 5 barrels of wine a day. Let's go. Let's go. When do we leave? Chapter 232. A year later, in Blogna, the country of scholars. It was early spring, and the cold that had lasted for an entire winter in the capital, Leinster, was gradually disappearing, making people feel more comfortable. The trees on the streets were greener, and the pedestrians were wearing fewer clothes. Similar to the gradually warming weather, the city was also full of enthusiasm and vitality. There was no other reason, but it was the start of school season. Every spring, the capital of the country of scholars, Leinster, was known as the most lively place in the human world. The younger generation of all the countries in Ya would gather here, not only the nobles of the various countries, but also many people who came from afar. As a country where more than 80% of the schools in Ya gathered, there were many academies in Blogna, and Leinster, as the capital of Blogna, had the reputation of being the capital of academies. More than 60% of the areas in Leinster were educational institutions, among which there were more than 20 academies that only 14-year-old adults could enter. With so many academies recruiting students, it was natural that not only were the nobles recruited, but in fact, most of the academies were composed of commoners. Leinster Comprehensive Academy, Cecily Women's Academy, St. Wisdom's Academy, these were all famous academies funded by big schools, each with their own characteristics in different fields. But when it came to the most influential and powerful, there was only one answer, and that was St. Freya's Academy. St. Freya's Academy, the first academy in the Academy City, was built more than 900 years ago, and could be said to be as old as the country. In fact, the city of Leinster was originally built around St. Freya's Academy, but in the following few hundred years, due to the increasing number of students, it continued to expand, and finally reached its current scale. So how big was St. Freya's Academy's influence? This was a difficult question to answer, but according to St. Freya's biggest event every 100 years, the 100th anniversary of the school, it could be seen. All the heads of state had graduated from St. Freya's Academy, and according to Luo Ya's thinking in his previous life, They were basically the spokespersons of St. Freya's Academy, but this lineup of spokespersons was not as simple as just shocking, it was terrifying. Grasping the top resources, to a certain extent, would create a siphon effect, and St. Freya's Academy was the most typical example of this. When generations of emperors and kings graduated from this academy, their descendants and subordinates basically had no other choice. Unless they were stupid, they would do anything to get in. For example, the princes of various countries. When their fathers, grandfathers, and ancestors all attended St. Freya's school, it would unknowingly become a tradition. Even if they didn't want to, they had to consider whether they would be attacked by others, especially the conservative faction, if they changed schools. As for the nobles of the various countries, they had even less of a choice. Their own bosses were there, so how could they run away? As the first academy, St. Freya's Academy had started this virtuous cycle of excellent students hundreds of years ago. This advantage had continued to this day, and the reason why it was able to maintain its dominance in Bologna, the country of education, was not only because of its excellent students, but also because it had enough money. After so many years, when the graduates recalled their school days after experiencing the vicious beating of society, they would feel an indescribable sense of beauty. This did not only exist in Luo Ya's previous life, but also in Shi Ya. Or rather, after experiencing the intrigue and swords, Shi Ya's nobles had a deeper feeling. However, unlike the graduates of other academies, those who reminisced about St. Freya's Academy in their dreams were all big shots. Every year, the Academy's annual donations accounted for more than half of its income, so strictly speaking, this academy was funded by the nobles of Shia. St. Freya's Academy could be said to be the best in the academy city of Leinster, but compared to its great reputation, there were not many students here. Therefore, the students who wore the Book of Truth badge of St. Freya's Academy naturally stood out in this city where students made up more than 50% of the population. For example, right now, on a chair by the side of the road leading to the academy area, a young man attracted the attention of many young people passing by. It's a male student from St. Freya's Academy. Lower your voice. Looks like he's a noble, and his rank is probably not low. On the far side of the street, a few girls from Cecily Girls' Academy gathered together and chatted, their eyes occasionally stealing glances at the black-haired young man on the opposite side of the street. Nearby, there were several small groups like this. During their time as a student, some people chose to study hard to enrich themselves, while others chose to use their youth to fall in love. Everyone's choice was different, and each had their own exciting moments. But in the city of Leinster, the hormones of puberty seemed to be secreted more than in other places. It couldn't be helped. No matter how they tried to hide it, humans were animals who followed their instincts. Being attracted to outstanding members of the opposite sex was a necessity engraved in their genes. And the city of Leinster was the cradle of the young generation. Under the fame of St. Freya's Academy, its students were added with a layer of luxurious background. For girls from Cecily Girls' Academy, which had a 0 male-to-female ratio, it was almost a natural attraction. They looked at people with prejudice, not to mention the fact that the young man opposite them was so outstanding. It was a black-haired young man wearing a dark-colored coat. His appearance was handsome, his body was slender, and his calm and gentle temperament made people feel good about him. His pair of golden eyes were noble and mysterious, and his whole body exuded the noble elegance of a superior noble. At this moment, the young man was reading a book with his head lowered. From the old packaging and yellowed paper, it should be an ancient book with a long history. Beside him, a classical cane was placed. The streets were crowded with people during the school season, and noise was inevitable. But around the young man reading the book, there was a strange sense of tranquility. Wouldn't it be unladylike to ask for his name? Is he a freshman? Or a senior? It doesn't matter. Hurry up and decide. If you dawdle, the girls from St. Westwood's Academy will beat you to it. The girl groups looked at each other anxiously from afar. No one wanted to let the other get ahead of them. But in Shi Ya, most girls were more conservative, especially those who had just entered the academy not long ago. It took a lot of courage to hit on a man. Just as they were monitoring each other and discussing endlessly, the black-haired young man on the opposite chair moved. Chapter 233. Luo Ya Akut was a cautious person. This was the common evaluation of everyone who knew him since his reincarnation. From the moment Luo Ya came to this world, he knew that he was not the chosen one. A strong sense of crisis accompanied him for a long time. Even after being accompanied by the girls, Luo Ya still had some strong after-effects. One of the most important was the reverence for the plot. After living in Shia for so many years, Roha didn't think that the Recorder's Eye was a simple game anymore. This world was undoubtedly realistic, it wasn't so much a Galga as it was. In desperation, the Chosen One could only look at the abstract map and walk silently. As a result, he didn't look left and right when crossing the road and just happened to block the carriage of the Sorofia family. He even almost startled the horse, which angered Shia Luote, who was in a hurry in the carriage. He was reprimanded by the red-haired lady. And this was the first meeting between Paul and Shia Luote. It could be said that the plot of the two people after that began to extend from this point. Of course, that was in the game. In reality, everything would change, because Luo Ya Akut was here. What the hell is this thing that Lisa drew? On the busy street, Paul Ackman looked at the map in his hand with black lines all over his head. He repeatedly looked up at the surroundings and looked down to compare the map with his face full of bewilderment. It had been a month since Paul came to this city called Leinster, but in fact, the number of times he really went out of the house could be counted on one hand because the purpose of him coming here was for closed special training. As an illegitimate child found by the spies of the Austin Empire half a year ago, Paul's 16 years of life so far could be said to be quite dull. He grew up as an orphan in a remote village of the Austin Empire and did not receive much education from a young age. He only learned literacy and arithmetic from the retired priest in the village. The rest of the time was basically engaged in agricultural work. At that time, Paul never thought that his life would change in any way. It was not until he was almost kidnapped from the village by the spies that Paul's world changed dramatically. He suddenly became the prince of the Austin Empire. He had an emperor father who looked only middle-aged but was actually more than 100 years old. He had two brothers who disliked him to the extreme and an elder sister whom he had never met. This was his experience in the capital of the Austin Empire, Theo. As for the most feelings, it was probably hostility and malice. The two princes of the Austin Empire were close to 30 years old, and Princess Lillian had already shown her talent. The political camp division was quite clear. In other words, there was no room for others to intervene. An illegitimate child who had low extraordinary strength, no culture, and no background. He had been wandering outside for more than 10 years, was destined to be unpopular in politics of the Austin Empire. And the nobles. Paul had lived in the capital for more than 3 months. During this period, there were 0 nobles who visited him, which could be said to be the most obvious feedback. And it was precisely because of this that Emperor Lucas of the Austin Empire had no choice but to let Paul go to school at the age of 16 to make up for the shortcomings in all aspects caused by the years of wandering outside. The 1-month closed-door training involved various fields such as politics, history, language, etiquette, swordsmanship, spells, and so on. However, even with so much training, Paul still didn't make any significant progress, especially in the aspect of extraordinary strength. He always felt that he was lacking something. But it had to be said that although he didn't get along well with the nobles, Paul got along well with the servants. As for the current situation, it was an accident. Originally, Paul's trip alone this time was a measure by the social class teacher to cultivate his self-confidence. As a student of the St. Freya Academy, he should have received the envious gazes of passers-by while wearing the badge of the Book of Truth. The difficulty of asking for directions would be halved, and he might even be hit on by girls. But the reality was that he forgot to bring it. Without the badge, he only had a map casually drawn by the maid. The huge flow of people in the big city made Paul, who grew up in the village and lived in a society of acquaintances, very uncomfortable. He called out to several girls in a row, but they all rolled their eyes at him. Probably, should I cross the road from here? Enduring the anxiety and pressure in his heart, Paul muttered to himself according to the map, but what he didn't expect was that at this time, a gentle voice suddenly sounded next to him. No, you should keep going straight. Heh. Hearing the answer, Paul, who was taken aback, raised his head and saw a smiling black-haired boy. A dark suit jacket, a white lining, a neat and beautiful bow tie, a slender but slightly thin body, and golden eyes shining with gentle light. The moment he saw Luo Ya, Paul was stunned for a moment, and he understood one thing reflexively in his mind. This is an aristocrat. Paul looked at the boy in front of him who seemed to be glowing. Thinking so, he couldn't help but lower his head with some inferiority. Luo Ya was taken aback when he saw this. He thought for a moment and asked, "Student, are you looking for the St. Freya Academy?" "Ah, yes, eh?" "Student." "Yes, you are a student." Luo Ya reached out and pointed at the badge of the Book of Truth on his chest, smiling at the confused boy. Paul's eyes widened when he saw this, and he hurriedly thanked him. "Thank you, no, thank you for your help, senior. I am a freshman this year. It is my first time coming to the academy." Chapter 234. In the carriage on the road, Shia Luote Sorophia stretched her arms and looked at the crowd on the street. She frowned slightly, feeling a little irritated. "It's been 3 months since we last met." The reddish-brown-haired girl muttered to herself, pouring out her inner worries in this empty space. Luo Ya Akut, the lover of the girl, was also her nominal fiancé. Since they met last year, they had experienced many difficulties and fell in love with each other for more than a year. However, the two of them had not been together much recently. Since the new year, when Luo Ya and Ari Lisi set off to the holy capital to reunite with Ka Dia, who was escorting the provisions, for more than 3 months, the princess of Saint Mestre, Nuo Arya, had been using various reasons to not let Luo Ya leave. She dragged the time until the start of Saint Freya's Academy, causing Shia Luote and Luo Ya's plan to come to the country of scholars to be completely ruined. And counting back, it was also this woman who used the reason of the birthday party to keep Luo Ya for more than a month. In other words, since the end of last year, Shia Luote's sweet time with her lover had been taken away for more than 5 months. Thinking of this, the red-haired girl trembled with anger. In fact, since they parted ways last year in Rose, Luo Ya had been busy. First, it took 2 months to go to Karen Forest, then it was an emergency meeting with Shia Luote to discuss the relocation plan of the Ents. As the initiator of the plan, Luo Ya followed Cade throughout the operation. The ancient Ents were too big, so the transportation process was slow, and it took another 3 months. In the following time, as the Lord, Luo Ya began to settle down the Strength sect and Perseverance sect, and revised some laws. Coupled with the problems and affairs that Akut encountered during the period of economic development, it could be said that he was very busy. In this case, Shia Luote, who saw her lover in a terrible situation, naturally couldn't bear to stand by and watch. In fact, the help from Shia Luote played a big role, making the girl unanimously welcomed by the people and officials of Akut, and her reputation among the people was quite high. However, as the saying goes, where there are gains, there are losses. After Shia Luote became busy, the two had even less time to be affectionate. The reddish-brown-haired girl could not release her accumulated desires. This made the reddish-brown-haired girl extremely uncomfortable, and this irritable state was a manifestation of it. Ever since they set off for the scholar country, this had been going on for a long time. The sorrowful young lady looked out of the window. The academy city, Leinster, was a place Shia Luote knew she had to go since she was a child. In the midst of the excited shout, Shia Luote suddenly hugged the young man from behind. This intimate action immediately caused the students present to exclaim. Luo Ya's brain that finally worked was once again stunned, and so was Paul, whose eyes were wide open. "So, the carriage stopped because of me?" The black-haired young man, who realized the truth, suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, and his body suddenly relaxed. Behind him, the young lady was rubbing his shoulder as if no one else was around. "It's been 3 months, we finally meet again. Fortunately, I paid attention to the roadside, Shia Luote. Don't be like this, there are too many people nearby." Chapter 235. On the street, Paul Aikman, who heard Xia Luote's self-introduction, was dumbfounded. At the same time, all the girls nearby who were staring at Luo Ya were also dumbfounded. Xia Luote faintly glanced at the thieving cat trainees who had shrunk back. She was very satisfied with the effect of her declaration of sovereignty. If it was just a couple, some girls would not be afraid, but an engagement was completely different. This was because an engagement was inevitably the result of the communication between the two families. It represented the exchange of interests, and there was no room for involvement. The students of Cecily Women's College gritted their teeth and left. The girls of St. Wisdom College also gradually dispersed. Xia Luote looked at the situation and was slightly relieved. She finally had time to turn her head and look forward. It was only now that the brown-haired young lady really took a serious look at the appearance of the boy in front of her. Overall, he was above average, and his clothes were not bad. But for some reason, he gave off a feeling that his clothes did not match him. "Ah, my name is Paul Aikman. Nice to meet you." Paul, who had just recovered from the shock brought by Xia Luote, replied. As soon as the words left his mouth, the atmosphere immediately stagnated. The brown-haired young lady stared at Paul with her eyes wide open. The latter also remembered the national enmity between the two families. "Aikman? I'm sorry, Xia Luote." The Aikman family could be said to be the life and death enemy of the Sorofia family. Xia Luote had already seen Paul, the illegitimate son who had caused a sensation in the Austin Empire half a year ago. But even if he was a stain on the Austin Empire's emperor, walking black material, Xia Luote still did not like him, and even had her own prejudice against him. But as the saying goes, you have to look at the master before beating a dog. Paul was now with Luo Ya, and the two seemed to be talking before. So, no matter how much Xia Luote hated the Aikman family, she had to give face to her man. She must not make things unpleasant on the spot. Thinking of this, Xia Luote met Luo Ya's gaze and nodded obediently. "Mr. Aikman, you don't need to apologize. You are now Luo Ya's friend. Our two countries have already signed a peace treaty. Let bygones be bygones. Dear, it's great to be able to see you in advance. However, I'm in a bit of a rush. It seems that we can only meet at the academy later," the reddish-brown-haired girl said as she bowed to the two of them. "Well then, excuse me." Due to the enmity between them and the Aikmen, Xia Luote politely left after greeting them, leaving only a wisp of fragrance in Luo Ya's nose. Looking at the departing horse-drawn carriage, Paul sighed and blamed himself. "I must have made her unhappy. I'm sorry. Will it affect you? Don't worry, she's not that kind of person. Like I said before, your surname is not your fault. This cannot be changed. What kind of person you are is the most important." The black-haired boy still had a gentle smile on his face. He was not angry at Xia Luote's departure at all. In fact, Luo Ya's heart was filled with gratitude and joy. It can be changed, it can really be changed. This world is real, and the power of the plot does not exist. Luo Ya clenched his fists in excitement. Recalling the hard work of the past 5 years, his heart was filled with emotions. On the other side, Paul Aikman was equally excited. Xi Ya above, such a righteous person. Before coming to St. Freya Academy, Paul was fearful of this world-famous academy. After all, since he entered the upper class, almost everyone he came into contact with was his enemy. However, in this city, there was actually a student who did not discriminate against him. This gave him great encouragement. Perhaps, life in the academy is not that bad. Paul held such hope in his heart and walked in the direction of the academy with Luo Ya. The two people chatted casually and quickly became familiar with each other. Men's friendship was often simple and direct. From knowing each other to becoming friends, there was no need for formal inquiries like in movies and TV series. Instead, it was hidden in the words of chatter and the tacit understanding of looking at each other with a smile. There was no need to think like when facing a girl, it was pure and direct. In the process of getting along, Paul found that Luo Ya was a very knowledgeable person. Along the central road leading to St. Freya Academy, he could tell the history of many buildings along the way and tell the anecdotes of many famous people here. For Paul, who grew up in a remote mountain village in the Austin Empire, the boy's knowledge was beyond his reach. After discovering Luo Ye's brilliance, Paul's respect for him increased again. Taking this opportunity, Paul could not help but raise his doubts about St. Freya Academy. St. Freya Academy, although the name was repeatedly mentioned by the teachers, in fact, Paul was not clear about the specific situation. After all, no one had any expectations for him. The teachers only told him not to cause any trouble. Intelligence resources were still a luxury for Paul at this stage. Luo Ya was actually clearer than anyone about the situation of the boy who came with him, so he did not ask much. Instead, he chose to calmly tell the information he knew. St. Freya Academy was a school that, to a certain extent, transcended the city of academies of Leinster. Historically speaking, St. Freya Academy was established earlier than Leinster City, and from a high-level perspective, the Dean of St. Freya Academy, Antonio Cole, was the Speaker of the Parliament of the country of scholars. He was the real leader of this country. Chapter 236. The moment he stepped into the school gate, Luo Ya's body had an unexpected violent reaction. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as if he was struck by lightning. It was a violent resonance that came from the source substance inside his body, and even his entire bloodline. At this moment, the hustle and bustle of the people nearby seemed to be far away from him. Luo Ya seemed to be on a calm water surface. Little ripples spread under his feet, and on the other side in the distance, there was also a blurry figure standing opposite him. The ripples on the left and right collided, and the two people's eyes met at this moment. After a moment, the mysterious resonance ended. Luo Ya, who returned to reality, suddenly raised his head and looked in the direction he felt, but he only saw a solemn white building. Who is it? What was that just now? The black-haired boy stood stiffly at the school gate, his mind blank. The students passed by him one by one, but Luo Ya still couldn't recover. Crown actually produced a resonance reaction. How is this possible? The boy pondered this question with an incomprehensible expression on his face. The only reason was because of the resonance situation. Resonance between origin substances was something that had a negligible probability of happening. Most people would never encounter such a thing in their entire lives because resonance was actually a special reaction between two people's origin substances and bloodlines. Even in a situation where most extraordinarists would choose one of the three great origin substances, resonance was still extremely rare. However, Luo Ya's situation was different. Luo Ya was not a user of the three great source substances. His crown was an exclusive source substance extended from the Akhet family's bloodline. In theory, in the case where he was the only son of the Akhet family, Luo Ya could not have any resonance reaction in his life. Luo Ya, Luo Ya? Luo Ya turned his head and looked to the side. He saw that Paul was blocked by a female student wearing a purple rose logo. The two of them looked at him together. Perhaps it was because Luo Ya's appearance was better, but the female student's expression softened a lot after she glanced at the school badge on his chest. She opened her mouth to ask about Luo Ya. This student, is he someone you know? I know him. He forgot to bring his school badge, so I can't let him in. I need someone to register and vouch for him or go back to get it. Are you willing to vouch for him? Was this even possible? Luo Ya couldn't help but be taken aback after hearing her words. She didn't expect her existence to cause such a consequence. In the beginning of the game, Paul, who was a lone ranger, didn't know anyone else. So, when he announced his name, it caused a commotion. But now that Luo Ya was beside him, Paul naturally didn't want to cause trouble. Luo Ya, please, help me with this. Looking at the boy in front of her who put his palms together and begged her, Luo Ya's expression became weird. But after thinking about it, she felt relieved. Indeed, if she looked at it from Paul's point of view without the player's point of view, being blocked on the first day of school was undoubtedly a disaster. As an illegitimate child, Paul didn't want to attract too much attention. Is this the butterfly effect? I didn't expect that even Lillian's side was accidentally destroyed. Luo Ya nodded in the boy's pleading eyes and followed the senior to write the registration form. When she saw Paul's surname, the female student's face changed obviously. But since the procedures were complete, she could only let the two of them go. By the way, senior, can I ask what the building in that direction is? Luo Ya pointed to a white building in the direction of her perception and asked, trying to find some clues for her strange feeling just now. However, after learning Paul's identity, the female student's attitude suddenly turned cold. I don't know. I see. The black-haired boy didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he stared in that direction and pondered. After hesitating for a moment, Luo Ya gave up the idea of rushing over now. The information obtained from the resonance at that moment was too little. It was almost useless in the school where the flow of people and the density of the population was very high. If she ran over now, Luo Ya wouldn't be able to distinguish which one was the resonator. Thinking of this, the boy could only shake his head and continue walking. Although Luo Ya was very puzzled by this situation, resonance was something that would happen sooner or later as long as one lived in the school. Now, it seemed that the entrance ceremony was more important. Luo Ya, thank you. After walking for a distance, Paul, who was clutching his chest with an expression of having escaped a disaster, said so sincerely. The black-haired boy didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 237. Lillian Aikman was an extremely complicated and contradictory girl, which originated from her family. Family was often a paradise for underage girls, but for Lillian, who was part of the royal family of the Austen Empire, family was the source of torture. Everyone knew about the current situation of the Austen Empire. It had been more than 10 years since Lillian's two brothers graduated from St. Freya Academy, but the two had not made any breakthroughs in their extraordinary powers. The fierce internal strife had been going on for a long time, and it had only intensified in recent years as Lillian grew up. There was no kinship in the royal family. This sentence could not be more appropriate to describe the royal family of the Austen Empire. Insidious schemes and vicious traps were the most gifts the girl received from her two blood relatives. As for her parents, Lillian was just a tool in their eyes. One was a tool for inheritance, and the other was a tool for maintaining their own prosperity and wealth. She was not replaced because she was the best. The ugliness of human nature was exposed to Lillian early on, causing the girl to give up on her family, which was just a facade. However, this was also the reason why Lillian was conflicted. Just like how the more you lacked something, the more you yearned for it. Deep in Lillian Aikman's heart, she was extremely eager to have a real family. To love and care for each other, to have a deep, unchangeable, and inseparable relationship, this was the real family in Lillian's heart. In the past, this could only be an unachievable dream for the girl, but today, Lillian found that she had a chance. It was just that it was not a family by blood, but a family by blood. Blood and bloodline were two completely different concepts in Ya. Blood was brought to the child by the parents from birth, while bloodline was awakened by oneself. The two seemed similar, but in fact, they were completely different. Take Luo Ya for example. Luo Ya's relative by blood was his father, Ka Dia. His relatives by blood were the previous generation of awakened, Roy Aikman, and the previous generation's Vincent Aikman. Luo Ya and Vincent's era were more than 800 years apart. From the perspective of bloodline, there was not much difference between them after dozens of generations of dilution. However, if Vincent met Luo Ya, he would definitely accept him because the two of them had the same bloodline, which meant that they must have come from the same source. This was an indelible objective fact. In Ya, this kind of unique bloodline connection was considered noble and unique to extraordinaires. Most of the time, it was only found in clans that possessed exclusive source substances. However, in rare cases, two people who were completely unrelated to each other could find each other due to their similar bloodlines. The method was resonance. In other words, it was very likely that there was a blood relative of Lillian in the academy after the resonance. Stroking her chest, the black-haired girl's heart was in turmoil, but she had no idea what to do. The source substance, kingdom, was the source substance that the Austen Empire's royal family possessed. However, in reality, it was not a bloodline-exclusive source substance. Instead, it was a product that most people could accept like mercy. However, the Austen Empire's royal family had monopolized it since ancient times, and as the ruling clan, they were very adaptable to kingdom. Because of this, even among the Aikmen who used kingdom source substance, there was no commonality between awakened bloodlines. In other words, the reason Lillian was so powerful was because the bloodline she had awakened was more powerful than others, making it stand out among all the other bloodlines. In fact, Lillian had always felt that her bloodline might have an exclusive source substance, but as a core member of the Austen Empire, her identity as the imperial princess meant that she had to accept kingdom source substance. Otherwise, she would become a political target for others to use against her. From an objective point of view, kingdom was indeed one of Ya's best source substances. Although exclusive source substances were closer to one's bloodline, they might not be as powerful as kingdom. In fact, in the long history of the Austen Empire, there were precedents of the Austen Empire's royal family choosing exclusive source substances, but the results were not satisfactory. Lillian's bloodline and source substance did not come from the same source, so there were two possibilities for the resonance that had appeared in her body. Resonance. Judging from the direction of the school gate, it should be a new student. If we're talking about the source substance resonance, it should be that Paul Aikman. The young girl, who was talking to herself, frowned slightly. Indeed, in terms of bloodline, Paul Aikman was her brother and sister, and they both had kingdom origin substance. It was most likely that the two of them would resonate with each other. However, Paul's identity made Lillian somewhat sensitive. An illegitimate child. In Lillian's eyes, who had been educated as a noble since she was young, this was a scandal of the Austen Empire's royal family. To be honest, Lillian did not want to have anything to do with this person. If the resonance was really him, Lillian would probably be very conflicted. Of course, there was another possibility, which was that it was not a source substance, but a more fundamental bloodline resonance. However, when she thought about this possibility, Lillian's eyes dimmed. Bloodline users were 1 in a million. Someone who had awakened the same extraordinary bloodline as Lillian, entered the same school in the same era, and happened to have a resonance. The probability of such a thing happening was probably so low that it could not be calculated. That's true. How could there be such a fate in this world? The black-haired girl who had calmed down sighed at her own extravagant hope. She slowly walked back to the table, and then her gaze sank slightly. At this moment, there was an exquisite letter in the middle of the table. The familiar double eagle symbol on the wax represented the Austen Empire's royal family. However, unlike the past, this letter was not written by someone else. It was written by the Austen Empire's emperor, Lucas. The meaning of the handwritten letter was self-evident. The contents of the letter were undoubtedly important. The black-haired girl naturally knew this. Therefore, after carefully opening the letter, she carefully read it. However, the contents of the letter left her rather confused. There were roughly 2 points in the letter. The first point was to ask Lillian not to let Paul Aikman, who had entered the school this year, have a hard time. Lillian had already guessed this request. After all, no matter what, Paul now carried the name of the Aikman family. However, the second point was completely unexpected to Lillian. Don't get close to the Ackett family. That was the content of the second paragraph, and Lillian also sensed that this was the true purpose of Lucas' letter. The Ackett family was a great noble family in the Saint Maister theocracy. As the Empress, Lillian had naturally heard of it. However, she was not allowed to get close to this family. What was the reason behind this obviously hostile order? The black-haired girl pondered for a long time but still could not figure it out. She could only pick up the student file placed on the side and flip through it again. Luo Ya Ackett. Looking at the name on the file, Lillian began to ponder in the empty room. Chapter 238. So many people of the same age. Walking on the vast lawn behind the school gate, Paul Aikman, who grew up in a mountain village, looked left and right. He was obviously not used to the current situation. Beside him, The black-haired youth was smiling helplessly. It had to be said that the current situation in St. Freya Academy was indeed somewhat nerve-wracking. Whether it was the scene or the people gathered, they were all too imposing. After entering the solemn school gate, Luo and the others were faced with a vast lawn plaza. The area was at least several football fields in Luo's previous life, and there was even an illusion that one could not see the end of it. Everywhere in the plaza were statues of famous teachers of St. Freya Academy in the past 1,000 years. Not to mention the past sages, the current Dean Antonio, the Vice Dean Campbell, the year directors of each year, and the famous Sage Mentor all had statues here. Sage Mentor was a unique title of St. Freya Academy. It meant that they had nurtured more than 100 outstanding graduates. 100 outstanding graduates did not seem like a lot, but it was actually very difficult because St. Freya Academy's model was that it was easy to enter, but difficult to leave. St. Freya Academy's entrance was actually not difficult, mainly because the tuition was expensive. However, it was very difficult to graduate from this school normally. In fact, every year there were many people who dropped out or repeated a year because of the lack of credits. The requirements for outstanding graduates were different from ordinary ones. They needed to be proficient in both literature and martial arts, and their credits were ranked in the top 100 of the school. Literature was needless to say, it was basically the same as the quality education in Luo's previous life, but there were some aristocratic classes such as etiquette. In theory, if a graduate wanted to successfully graduate, they would need to pass at least 20 literature courses. As for martial arts, it was naturally extraordinary strength. There were more ways to obtain it, but it was roughly divided into two types. One was the school ranking battle. This method was simple and straightforward. To put it bluntly, it was a fighting ring. Both sides would fight, and whoever was better would go up. Anyway, they were all in the school, so they would definitely not die. However, the corresponding credits given were actually not that much. The reason was that this ranking system was very unfair, because there was no division of grades, but rather a ranking of the entire school. From this point of view, in a 4-year school, the higher the grade, the greater the advantage, and in fact, the top 100 were indeed 3rd and 4th-year students. As for why it was designed this way, Luo reckoned that a large part of the reason was to let the graduates freeload off credits. As the saying went, actual combat was the fastest way to grow, and going out to do missions could be said to be a kind of actual combat with a certain degree of insurance. It could even be said that high-ranking extraordinaires could become one's personal bodyguard. For many nobles, this was a treatment that they could not enjoy except in school. And the knowledge learned from interacting with high-ranking extraordinaires, as well as the insights gained from watching them fight, these were priceless treasures that would be of great help to one's future development. For these people who thirsted for improvement, going out to do missions was really high risk, but high reward. There were actually quite a number of students who had such thoughts in the school, and there were also groups with similar thoughts, but the people who followed them were different, and that was the ring-bearers. Among the many privileges of the ring-bearers, one of them was that they could lead their own team to go out on missions. In this kind of situation where there was no help from the school, the credits for completing missions would be greatly increased or even doubled, and the rewards and reputation of the mission would all belong to the team member. Accumulating reputation was a very important thing for the ring-bearers, especially the heirs of the country. As for how important it was, the most representative and the most famous was the dragon-slaying incident of the Austin Empire a few hundred years ago. Of course, although it was called a dragon, it was not the kind that only existed in myths and were active in ancient times. Instead, it was a sub-dragon that did not even have wings, and was probably at the level of Source Rank 3. The incident should have happened more than 600 years ago, when the human world was not completely stable yet. From time to time, monsters would come out to stir up trouble. Among them, a sub-dragon at the border of the Austin Empire was a big trouble. At that time, the second-in-line heir of the Austin Empire was the ring-bearer of St. Freya's Academy. After some investigation, he joined forces with another ring-bearer of the Austin Empire to take on the dragon-slaying mission, and after a bloody battle, they succeeded in killing the sub-dragon. This dragon-slaying incident that did not have a mentor to lead the team shocked the whole Austin Empire at that time, and brought great fame and social resources to the prince. At that time, the members of the team were mostly descendants of the famous families of the Austen Empire. After this battle, they all persuaded their families to change their stance and support the second prince. Regardless of their previous relationship, the great honor of dragon slaying had united them as a whole, and in this case, it was definitely in the team's interest to have their former leader become the emperor. Was there a stronger relationship than having slain a dragon together when they were in the same school? Relying on the reputation of the people and the support of the team members' families, the prince successfully counterattacked in the later competition for the throne. This was the story of the famous dragon-slaying emperor of the Austen Empire, famous Ackman. He was an emperor for the rest of his life, and even until his death, he still enjoyed the benefits of slaying a dragon. Such a precedent not only attracted the envy of countless people, but also made the heirs of various countries vigilant. Therefore, it could be said that the heirs of various countries were eager to get the Ring of Roses. It was fine if they could not get it, but if they did, they would definitely lead a team on a mission. In this case, the team members who followed were not only for academic credits, but also to accumulate political resources for themselves. Under such circumstances, the number of people who went out on missions every year was still very high, and it was also the main way to provide academic credits. Of course, Luo Yue did not need to worry about this situation. After all, whether it was ranking battles or going out on missions, he could handle it with ease. However, Paul was not necessarily the same. Luo Yue was very clear about Paul's current situation. If he remembered correctly, this big brother should have just broken through to the source rank 5, and his strength should not even reach the new life average. However, his reputation as the illegitimate son of the Ackman family was that his ability to cause trouble was far superior to others. Looking at the few students approaching with unfriendly expressions and the blonde figure in the distance, Luo Yue felt relieved. Fortunately, everything was within his expectations. The first act of the flag-raising operation was finally done, and it was time to start work. Chapter 239. The black-haired teenager looked at the students who were staring at Paul from the side, then looked up at the familiar blonde figure surrounded by the crowd in front of him. Finally, he looked around and sighed. At the same time, he was relieved. If Luo Yue remembered correctly, this should be the last scene of Paul and Achamon's encounter. Who in the world wanted Paul to disappear the most? In the plot of Recorder's Eye, it might have been Luo Yue, but in reality, everything had changed. Luo Yue obviously had no such need, and the throne of the villain was naturally left to the other two. They were Paul's two good brothers. Since ancient times, internal strife was often the best explanation. The current situation of the Austen Empire was the best example. As an illegitimate child, Paul Achamon's talent was mediocre, but even so, the two princes of the Austen Empire were still worried. In fact, they didn't want Paul to go to school at all, because going to school was equivalent to having the hope of progress. Paul's hope of being promoted to a high-level extraordinaire was despair for them. Therefore, when Paul entered the academy, he was a gift from the two good brothers. After more than 10 years of running the Austen Empire's aristocracy, how could the academy lack their lackeys? Luo Yue silently observed the two people running over with his cane. He didn't mean to make the first move. After all, no one could predict the future under normal circumstances. On the other hand, Luo Yue and Paul had only known each other for less than an hour. Now, he just had to wait for the right time. The black-haired teenager thought so as he bid farewell to Paul and walked a little further away, silently observing the front. Paul Achamon looked at the nearby scenery, and his heart gradually calmed down from the initial panic. Slowly, there was a trace of joy. There were thousands of peers nearby. This was something Paul had never experienced before, so of course, it made him a little nervous. But after the nervousness, Paul also cheered up and realized that this was a new stage. This was not the Austen Empire, and the composition of the students was also from all over the world. Not many people here knew him, and the disgust and criticism of the aristocrats had disappeared. With the identity of a student, most people were relatively equal. As long as he worked hard on the new stage of the academy, his situation might really change. Paul strolled forward while thinking about the future, but after a few steps, he was suddenly stopped. "Hey, are you Paul? Hey, may I know who you are? We're your seniors." His right, the third son of Count Rick. "I'm Carlo, the second son of Count Kazar. We're here for a simple reason. We want you to do something for us." "Do something?" On the lawn, two men, one tall and one short, blocked the young man's way. After hearing that both of them were nobles of the Austen Empire, Paul's face immediately turned gloomy. When he heard the purpose of the two men, the young man had a bad premonition. The facts proved that Paul's premonition was right. As if echoing him, the tall and thin Carlo said faintly, "It's nothing much. I just hope that you can quit school on your own." "Quit school?" "That's right. You know the current situation in the country. The throne is in the hands of the two princes. You, an illegitimate child, have no right to inherit it. Can't you just be a piece of trash? Don't cause trouble for yourself." Carlo looked down at Paul's cold face and said these obviously insulting words. There was no fear in his heart. For an illegitimate child with no right to inherit, even if he was of Akeman blood, there was nothing to be afraid of. No matter which of the two princes became the new emperor, Paul would be suppressed for life. The possibility of a comeback was almost zero. But if he could drive him out of the academy, Carlo, as the second son, might be able to get the appreciation of Paul's elder brother, Prince Aubrey, and might even inherit the title. Behind him, Wright, as the third son of the Count, had the same idea. For a lifetime of glory and wealth, the two of them were willing to gamble. But unfortunately, their target was obviously unwilling to cooperate. "Are you kidding me? I refuse." The anger of being insulted burned in his heart. Paul, who just had hope in the academy, clenched his fists with anger. He didn't expect that after entering the academy, he would encounter the obstruction of his two brothers. This made him disheartened, and at the same time, he also broke out in rebellion. Seeing him like this, Carlo and the others' faces turned gloomy. "Brat, it seems that you don't know what's good for you. I think you want to. Wait, right, don't be anxious. He, it seems that our Prince Paul hasn't fully understood his position. Then let me explain it to him." Carlo stretched out his hand and stopped his burly companion. His face showed a mocking smile, and his eyes looked up and down at the young man. "Junior Paul, looking at you, don't tell me you still have some expectations for the academy life." "What?" Chapter 240. There was still an hour before the opening ceremony. The lawn square in front of the auditorium was filled with people. Thousands of freshmen were looking forward to the beautiful scenery of St. Freya Academy. But in the corner of the square, the atmosphere was somewhat different. "What are you kneeling for? Stand up." The black-haired boy supported Paul's knees with his cane. His cold and majestic voice came from above. Paul, who had his head lowered, was slightly stunned. The next moment, the heavy pressure on his body suddenly disappeared. He could not help but raise his head in surprise. "Luo-ya," Paul muttered the boy's name with a surprised expression. The current Luo-ya gave him a completely different feeling from before. In the past, Luo-ya gave him the impression of a gentle and elegant aristocrat who liked to read books. But now, the Luo-ya gave him the impression of majesty. Under the faint light of the spell, the boy's golden eyes shone. His black hair and clothes fluttered in the wind. His calm expression and firm eyes seemed to be silently telling something, showing that he was far more experienced than ordinary people. Under Luo-ya's powerful appearance, the nearby shouts gradually subsided. Carlo and Wright looked at each other with surprise. They looked at the unknown Luo-ya and hesitated for a moment. On the other side, the boy also sighed silently in his heart. Unexpectedly, the plot had changed. Luo-ya recalled the plot in Recorder's eye and his heart was full of doubts. Normally, the last part of the first act of Paul Acheman's story should be that Paul pretended to agree to drop out of school during his conversation with the other party, and then sprinted toward the auditorium while shouting for help. This kind of behavior was quite in line with Paul's current strength. After all, as a level 5 source ranker, facing 2 level 4 source rankers, there was no other way but to run. In fact, this kind of behavior did attract the attention of the Nuo Arya, and then Miss Angel came to the rescue and got to know Paul. Such a big scene, no matter what, the Nuo Arya must have seen it. Forget it, I'll just treat it as doing good deeds. Luo Ya helplessly turned his head and looked at Carlo, who was looking at him vigilantly. The latter hesitated for a moment and cautiously began to ask questions. This student, you should be a new student, right? May I ask who you are? Luo Ya Akut of the Theocracy of Saint Maister. Theocracy? Then why are you meddling in other people's business? Upon hearing Luo Ya's name, the two men heaved a sigh of relief. Although the Church of Saint Maister was powerful, they couldn't do anything to the Austin nobles. After learning about Luo Ya's background, the two men's tone became even more unbridled. Kid, I advise you to mind your own business. This is an internal affair of the Austin Empire. That's right. This matter has nothing to do with you. Please leave quickly. Carlo warned with an unkind expression, and the nearby students also started to talk about it. Paul, as the Prince of the Austin Empire, didn't have a good relationship with Luo Ya's country. In the distance, the students surrounding the blonde girl also frowned. Your Highness, Lord Luo Ya, it doesn't matter. Just keep watching. Nuo Arya looked at the figure in front of her and gradually relaxed her brows. With a smile, she stopped everyone's doubts. In the distance, the black-haired boy stole a glance at Miss Angel and heaved a sigh of relief. Although the reality of the situation had changed, and Paul wouldn't run to Nuo Arya's side, Luo Ya still chose to stop this farce. There were two main reasons for this. The most important one was that Luo Ya felt that in this situation, even if Paul didn't cry for help, Nuo Arya wouldn't turn a blind eye to it. Having known Nuo Arya for several years, Luo Ya knew Heathcliff too well. Although Nuo Arya often couldn't control his desire to abuse her, putting aside this small flaw, Nuo Arya's nature was just like her origin substance. She was kind and righteous. In the face of this kind of ugly bullying, no matter who the victim was, Nuo Arya would intervene. And the other reason was Roha's own perception of the situation. You guys are a little disgusting. What did you say? In front of the two unfriendly people, the black-haired boy said with disgust as if he was looking at something disgusting. Bullying the weak. In terms of pure blood, the two of you have perfectly inherited the fine tradition of the Austin Empire. Your purity is so high that I want to vomit. Hee, I didn't expect to be provoked here. Boy, you should have thought about the consequences of doing this, right? Be careful. After listening to Luo Ya's straightforward words, Carlo, who had no restrictions on the nobles of the theocracy, couldn't stand it anymore. He condensed the curse power on his body, and his right hand swelled into the claws of a giant beast and swung at the black-haired boy. Paul, who was on the side, hurriedly reminded him, but surprisingly, the boy didn't move at all. You want to fight? Sure, but not with me. Chapter 241. On the square, amidst the beast shadows and chaos, Lillian Aikman and Luo Ya Akut looked at each other across the air. Their eyes were full of indifference. Don't trust Aikman. The black-haired boy looked at the woman in the high place, and the message he saw on the tree man in the Karen forest flashed in his heart. There was no doubt that the message from the ancestors had a great impact on Luo Ya. It made him more vigilant when facing the Aikman family except for Paul, who was an illegitimate child, especially Lillian Aikman. Everyone knew the situation in the Austin Empire today. Whether it was the eldest prince, Lucius Aikman, or the second prince, Aubrey Aikman, they were all well-known trash. They couldn't do anything at all. The only threat he could meet was Lillian. Although they only looked at each other once, Luo Ya could clearly feel the hostility and indifference in Lillian's purple eyes. In fact, his body was indeed shrouded under the pressure of this Lady Purple Rose, so he could basically be sure of one thing. As one of the heroines, Lillian Aikman, who had no contact with Luo Ya at all, was basically the same as in the original work. She still had inexplicable hostility toward him, and Luo Yue had no intention of gaining the favor of this Lady Purple Rose now. After roping in Nuo Arya, Xia Luote, and Ari Lizzie, Lillian alone could no longer pose a threat to him. On the other hand, even if Luo Yue wanted to gain her favor, it would be a waste of effort because he didn't have the conditions to do so. Lillian Aikman looked incomparably cold, but she was actually a hidden brother complex. As for why it was hidden, it was because she had never had a brother so far. In the game recorder's eye, Lillian's favor for Paul was not high at the beginning, but as time passed, Lillian's brother complex would gradually awaken. As her brother, Paul would receive more and more care from her. It was almost an easy win. Regarding this situation, Luo Yue concluded that it should be the rebound caused by Lillian's extreme lack of familial love since childhood. Her obsession with her family was beyond imagination, and regardless of their real blood relationship, Paul was at least her brother in name. As for caring about her, being completely different from the rest of the Austen royal family and so on, these were all secondary in Luo Yue's eyes. A Seisai, who didn't know how to do that? With an ice beauty sister who treated you wholeheartedly, who wouldn't want to be a Seisai? If they weren't her family, they wouldn't be able to gain her trust, and they wouldn't be able to break through her impenetrable heart. Everything else would be for naught. The lack of hardware made Luo Yue give up on building a good relationship with Lillian. At the same time, the black-haired young lady had the same intention. She recalled the long-awaited letter from her father. Do not approach the Ackett family. This was an order from His Majesty, and as a princess, Lillian had to obey it. But the young lady didn't think that this approach was a physical approach. It was obvious that if there were people in this world who would cause problems for Lillian by getting close to them, the Austen Empire wouldn't simply send a letter. This approach should mean getting close to them, which meant that Lillian mustn't interact with the Ackett family. Even though she didn't know the reason, if that was the case, avoiding contact or maintaining vigilance and hostility would be the simplest way. As a matter of fact, Lillian had decided not to have any interactions with Luo Yue and Luo Yue. But she didn't expect Luo Yue to appear beside Paul. Conspiracy. This was the first word that popped up in Lillian's mind after discovering Luo Yue by Paul's side. One was the illegitimate son of the Austen Empire who had just been found half a year ago, while the other was the son of a marquis who had received a complete aristocratic education in the Saint Maister theocracy. Be it their past experiences or the environment they grew up in, they were worlds apart. Lillian didn't think that they would have anything in common, let alone become friends within the first hour of school. All in all, it was a big problem for someone from the Saint Maister theocracy to get close to Paul, the illegitimate son of the emperor. No matter if Luo Yue's target was Paul or if he approached her through Paul, it could be determined that he had malicious intentions. After confirming this, Lillian's gaze turned colder. After the two of them stared at each other for a few moments, Luo Yue turned to the huge monster that extended from the cane and ordered, "Spit them out." Following Luo Yue's order, the mouths of two of the Hydra's heads began to squirm. A few seconds later, the two heads spat out two human-shaped objects mixed with mucus like phlegm. They were Carlo and Luo Yue, who were swallowed by the Hydra. At that moment, Carlo's clothes were tattered, and he was unconscious on the lawn. His entire body was covered in sticky saliva. But even though he was in a sorry state, there were no obvious wounds on his body. Luo Yue didn't care about the two half-naked men on the ground. After spitting them out, the Hydra staff began to shrink rapidly under his control. It didn't take long for it to turn back into a simple cane. On the other side, the students of the Academy Security Department who were responsible for maintaining law and order rushed over. They surrounded Luo Yue vigilantly while checking on the condition of the two men. They just fainted. They should be fine. Is that so? Carry them away. The students of the security department heaved a sigh of relief after confirming that the two men were still alive. The atmosphere in the vicinity also relaxed a lot. After the black-haired young man dispelled the rebirth body skill of the Hydra staff, he looked up at the attic again. This time, the hostility in the gaze from above faded slightly. The reason why Luo Yue took the initiative to let the two idiots go wasn't out of kindness. In fact, he wanted to express to Lillian that he wasn't hostile because the Academy Security Department who maintained law and order in the square belonged to Lillian's organization. If one observed carefully, one would notice that every member of the security department had the Purple Rose faction logo on their chest. The degree of student autonomy in St. Freya Academy was quite high, and law and order had always been maintained by the highest-ranked ringbearers and their factions. The head of the Academy Security Department this year was Lillian. To put it bluntly, the entire Academy was her territory. Whoever dared to make trouble would be smashing her territory. Unless one wanted to confront her head-on, Luo Yue had to give in. After the security department determined that the two men were not in danger, Lillian's coercion weakened a lot. The black-haired girl's eyes moved slowly and turned to the Hydra staff in Luo Yue's hand. An ancient curse item? Lillian's purple pupils contracted slightly. The aura of the Hydra staff just made her feel a slight threat. For a curse item, it was rare for her to be vigilant. Chapter 242. Looking at the refreshed values in the system, Luo Yue couldn't help but look around. Sure enough, he found that many people in the crowd were green. Obviously, the first large favorability value was from Paul, who he directly helped, and the rest of the small amounts were from the nearby students. Looking at the favorability value, Luo Yue couldn't help but sigh that there were still many good people in the world. Thinking of this, the young boy's mood improved a little, and he looked at Paul with a faint smile. "It's nothing, I just don't like to see the strong bullying the weak." "Brother Luo Yue, no, I should be younger than you." Luo Yue smiled helplessly and waved his hand. Under the gaze of the crowd, he helped Paul up. The bullied boy looked up with a touched face, but when he saw the scene behind Luo Yue, he was stunned. At the same time, a familiar voice sounded in Luo Yue's ears. "Indeed, I don't like it either, but you're making too much noise." "Huh." A helpless yet doting sigh echoed in his ears, causing the black-haired youth to blink his eyes and turn his head, just in time to see a golden figure strolling over from the separated crowd. Nuo Arya Heathcliff slowly approached under the encirclement of the nobles. Unlike the last time on the street, Luo Yue was calmer this time. Luo Yue had just liberated the Hydra. After such an obvious disturbance, Nuo Arya was bound to appear. Because Luo Yue belonged to the theocracy of Saint Mestre, strictly speaking, he was under her jurisdiction. This year, because of Nuo Arya's enrollment, the nobles of the theocracy of Saint Mestre who could afford to pay for the tuition fee would pay for Heathcliff's tuition fee. The number of new students far exceeded that of previous years, and their task was naturally to protect Her Royal Highness, although Her Royal Highness didn't need protection at all. As the only son of the Acate family, Luo Yue's status in the theocracy of Saint Mestre was still very high. Coupled with his personal relationship and scandals with Nuo Arya since childhood, Luo Yue could be said to be second only to the theocracy's nobles, so to a certain extent, his actions represented the theocracy. The noise nearby became louder after Nuo Arya walked over. Nuo Arya's beauty and holiness were like a bright light in the dark, and the grace of a ruler was even more impressive. The students who didn't know the girl's identity whispered to each other, and the new students in the distance were also attracted by the appearance of Hydra, and people kept running over to watch the show. Nuo Arya's eyes swept across the crowd, and at a glance, he found several girls who were staring at Luo Yue with strange gazes. Obviously, Luo Yue's performance of punishing evil and promoting good attracted the attention of many people, many of whom were sympathetic and opposed to school violence. TSK, such a situation really happened. Nuo Arya was speechless, but still maintained a smile on his face. Under everyone's gaze, Miss Angel walked to the boy's side and affectionately pulled his tie, while her other hand pinched his cheek. "Hey, Nuo Arya. You didn't come with me, and you didn't even look for me after coming here. This is your punishment, you rebellious minister." A somewhat angry and cute voice came from his ear, making Luo Yue, who was being pinched, stunned. Many people nearby and Paul behind Luo Yue were also stunned. Wait, why is this plot a bit familiar? Paul, who was shocked by Nuo Arya's charm, was stuffed with dog food before he could react. He immediately recalled the scene of Xia Luote, and his expression immediately became strange, but after looking at Luo Yue in front of him, he was relieved. Indeed, such a girl can only be matched by an upright and powerful person like Luo Yue. What a good person. Paul recalled what Luo Yue had done before, and his heart was moved again. On the other side, Nuo Arya was secretly observing the effect of this dog food attack, and she found that many girls were retreating, especially after hearing about Nuo Arya's identity. In this world, not many people dared to snatch a man from the future queen of St. Maester, not to mention that Nuo Arya's appearance was so outstanding, and the sense of holiness that belonged to the angel bloodline was something that others couldn't replicate. Of course, there were still people who were unwilling to give up. Nuo Arya understood this very well. After all, she knew how fragrant Luo Yue was. As for those who stared at her in the crowd, they were directly ignored by her. It's not that I don't want to look for you, it's just that, I met a new friend. Hey, a new friend. After listening to Luo Yue's explanation, the blonde girl's blue eyes turned and glanced at the boy behind Luo Yue. Suddenly, she remembered that when Paul was being targeted, Nuo Arya once saw Luo Yue looking at her in the crowd. I say, you didn't do it on my behalf, right? You can say that. Hey, is that so? Chapter 243. When the Princess of St. Maester's kiss landed on Luo Yue's face, it was as if the air in this corner of the great hall had stopped. Luo Yue felt the warmth on his face, and his brain turned white. His brain temperature began to rise rapidly. He never thought that Nuo Arya would do such a thing in front of so many people. Although the Princess of St. Maester was very open with Luo Yue in private, on the surface, she had always been a gentle and steady representative. In the 5 years since they met, Nuo Arya had never exposed their intimate relationship in public. After all, as the successor of a large country, it wasn't a good thing to expose one's love too obviously. But today, perhaps because she felt threatened by the surrounding people, Miss Angel's aggressive behavior was far more aggressive than before. However, what Luo Yue didn't know was that the Princess of St. Maester's reward wasn't limited to this. While Luo Yue's face was burning, Nuo Arya's blue eyes slightly narrowed. In the next moment, a moist feeling suddenly appeared in Luo Yue's mind. The black-haired youth's body suddenly trembled, and the girl took advantage of the situation to stand up and separate from him. With a smile on her face, she began to observe Luo Yue's reaction. Nuo Arya, you. At the end of the light kiss, the young man who was licked by the tip of the tongue covered his face and his face instantly turned red. After the light kiss ended, the surroundings became noisy. The gossipy crowd discussed animatedly. The young men who fell in love and fell out of love in less than a minute beat their chests and stomped their feet. The young ladies who glanced at the black-haired young man quietly gnashed their teeth. Only Luo Yue, in this chaos, felt dizzy from the heat. He used his hand to wipe away the imperceptible moist stain. He wanted to open his mouth to protest against Miss Angel's nonsense, but under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he couldn't say anything. He could only stutter with a red face and trembling lips. The pleasure of having an affair in front of so many people made the two's hearts restless. Nuo Arya looked at the red-faced youth, and the desire in her heart suddenly exploded. That's enough. What if someone finds out? In the eyes of outsiders, the two of them were whispering sweet nothings. In fact, the content was far more explosive than people imagined. Unfortunately, that was the end of it. What are you two doing here? Amidst the commotion, the crowd separated once again. Xia Luote, who was on the other side of the lawn square, finally arrived. As soon as she entered, she immediately noticed that the atmosphere was not right. After hearing what Nuo Arya had done, her expression immediately changed. Princess Nuo Arya, what did you do to my fiancé? Isn't this Miss Xia Luote? Long time no see. What did you just say? Fiancé? Who is that? Of course it's Luo Yue. Do you even need to ask? Hihi, Miss Xia Luote might have remembered wrongly. Luo Yue is not anyone's fiancé. Oh, I remember now. Your so-called fiancé, could it be that Luo Ya has a 100-year marriage contract that has no legal effect on you? Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the conflict between the two girls erupted. The 5-month gap had made Charlotte angry for a long time, and Noelle, whose good mood had been disturbed, also held a grudge in her heart. The two of them had a war of words, neither giving way to the other. The onlookers were dumbfounded and excited at the same time. On the distant rooftop, the white-bearded old man with a long staff looked over and smiled knowingly. What a group of energetic children. Dean Antonio stroked his beard and sighed. Behind him was a group of teaching staff in uniform. However, unlike Antonio, who had a gratified look on his face, the teaching staff were not as relaxed. Rather, they were under a lot of pressure. The teaching staff witnessed the commotion, but none of them could intervene because St. Freya Academy was a student-autonomous academy. Unless it was an emergency, the teaching staff couldn't easily intervene in student affairs, especially when Lillian was present. There was no need to intervene at all. There were not many high-level extraordinaires even among the teachers, and Lillian's level 3 source had a different meaning. The feeling just now. Her Royal Highness' strength has probably surpassed the concept of level 3 source. Yes, but as the preceptor of the Management Academy, this is also a good thing, isn't it? Yes, but thinking about it this way, the student she suppressed is not simple either. To be able to resist such a strong pressure, the teachers behind Antonio began to discuss the incident just now. Many teachers looked at Luo Ya's Hydra staff and began to raise questions to the dean. Dean, isn't that student staff too dangerous? If it goes out of control, indeed, that should be an ancient curse vessel. The teachers were talking about the origin of Roha's cane and worried about the possibility of losing control, but Antonio didn't care about it. Out of control? No, his control is very mature. The monster's behavior seems fierce, but in fact, it is all under his control. The proof is that after such a commotion, no innocent people were hurt at all. The old man looked at the boy in the crowd with a smile, then turned to look at the teachers behind him. And when it comes to danger, many experimental projects in this city are far more dangerous. Instead of paying attention to a student's curse vessel, it is better to work hard to control the experimental accident. Otherwise, if our Purple Rose really convenes a council to vote on who to expel, there is nothing I can do. Antonio's warning joke made many people's eyes flicker, and it also stopped some people from studying the Hydra staff. After warning the overly curious people, the old man's gaze returned to the square. Chapter 244. The opening ceremony was a process that every school had to go through since ancient times, whether it was in the past or the present. Generally speaking, the more impressive the school was, the more extravagant the ceremony would be. And in St. Freya Academy, this law was well proven. There were thousands of people in the audience. The Lord of Leinster City personally read the opening speech, and the leaders of the various sects took turns to take the stage. They were all high-level extraordinaires. Although the leaders of these sects would not personally teach the class, it was rare enough for them to gather together and show their faces. One must know that not all schools were in a cooperative relationship. Many of them competed with each other, and even had opposite ideologies. The disputes between scholars were not small at all, and were even more intense. Just like the dispute over the nature of light in the previous world, the particle and wave schools could not wait to smash each other's heads flat. Shiwaye's scholars were the same. Due to the powerful offensive nature of curses, if they really attacked, they would either die or be injured, so they could usually maintain restraint. However, it was more dangerous when they gathered together for a meeting. In the past, there were academic exchanges that went too far, and it was seamlessly linked to the martial arts conference. Each representative adhered to the spirit of true knowledge comes from practice and fought fiercely on the spot. Scholars were more stubborn, and some of them were not good with words. When they were angered by others, they would easily go to extremes. Compared to them, the instructors specially hired from the Kingdom of Knights, Ponde, were much better. Generally speaking, they would only scold and not hit. After all, unlike the depressed scholars who did research at home, Most of the knights had traveled the world and experienced the cruel beating of society. Naturally, they were more tactful. If there was any occasion that could make these people put down their past grudges and settle down, it was basically this auditorium, because this auditorium generally only had two purposes: to welcome the new and to dismiss the old. Aside from welcoming the new, seizing the new students' resources was the only and biggest goal of each school every spring. It represented the fresh blood and the future of a school, and the dismissal of the old was even more important. Other than the heirs of the St. Freya Academy who needed to return home to inherit their fiefs, there were also a group of second, third, and even fourth, fifth, and sixth sons. In addition, there were also local students, children of merchants, students who had fallen in love with the city after 4 years of study, and so on. Every year, there would be a large number of talents to be recruited after graduation. At this time, the elders of the school would suddenly become the head of the Human Resources Department. Just like animals entering the mating season, they would also enter the most intimate time of the year. During the opening ceremony and graduation ceremony, the representatives of each sect were all smiles, trying their best to leave the best impression on the students. Of course, flying lanterns and banners were also needed. There were also plenty of loudspeakers and people standing on the streets to snatch people. Their only goal was to get as many people as they could. After all, if they had fewer people, their opponents might have more. Luo Ya looked at the sect representative on the stage and ridiculed him in his heart, but he didn't dare to say a word. At this time, the black-haired youth's face was serious, his body was straight, and his eyes were straight. He looked like a good student who was seriously listening to the person on stage. As a person who had been a student for most of his life in his previous life, Luo Ya naturally wasn't really interested in the entrance ceremony. The reason why he was so good now was mainly because the situation forced him to. At this time, the black-haired youth was sitting in the middle of a long row of seats. On his left was Nuo Arya Heathcliff and a group of officials and attendants. On his right was Shia Luote Sorofia and a large number of attendants. The two groups of people each occupied one side. From the moment they entered the auditorium, the blonde girl and the reddish-brown girl refused to budge an inch. They were fighting fiercely for Luo Ya's seat. Seeing this, the black-haired youth suddenly had an idea. He suddenly remembered his good friend Mr. Paul. But when he turned around, he saw that Mr. Paul had followed the crowd and left with an encouraging smile. "Brother Luo Ya, you can do it." Vaguely, Luo Ya seemed to have heard Paul's inner voice. Obviously, after Paul learned about Nuo Arya's identity and saw Shia Luote rushing over, he felt that it was very awkward for him to be here. So, he silently left by himself. But he probably didn't know that it was actually when Luo Ya needed him the most. "Fuck. Why did you run away?" Looking at the youth disappearing into the crowd, Luo Ya gritted his teeth. After the Paul shield was gone, he had to face the firepower of the two girls. After some bargaining, the two sides could only compromise, and the final result was this situation. In the middle, Luo Ya's face was calm, but his heart was trembling. Especially towards the blonde girl, Luo Ya's guard was quite deep. The Nuo Arya seemed to like that kind of stimulation, especially his frightened appearance, which made the Nuo Arya's face turn red. Of course, Shia Luote on the other side also couldn't be underestimated. From a certain point of view, there was nothing that she didn't dare to do. After all, there was nothing more outrageous than kidnapping. Moreover, from the perspective of the academy, Shia Luote's family was the #1 financial backer. If the big miss committed a crime, the academy would be overestimating her ability to turn a blind eye. In this crisis, Luo Ya didn't even dare to put his hands on the armrest. He sat upright and still throughout the whole process. But what surprised him was that the two girls seemed to be concerned about the nearby population density and influence. They actually restrained themselves and didn't do anything out of line. As time passed, the black-haired youth felt a little relieved. He turned his attention back to the opening ceremony. After a large group of school representatives went through the motions, the main point of the opening ceremony finally arrived. With the sound of a wooden stick hitting the ground, a tall old man wearing a luxurious robe walked onto the stage. The moment he appeared, Luoya clearly felt the atmosphere in the auditorium change. The whispering students stopped making noise, and the teenagers who weren't sitting properly also straightened up. Almost everyone in the auditorium subconsciously began to adjust their state of mind to make their expressions and attitudes more in line with the etiquette. Antonio, the headmaster of St. Freya Academy, was a name that was widely known in Shiya, and even in the Kingdom of Scholars. There were two main reasons for this. The first was naturally his strength. No one knew exactly how strong he was because he hadn't fought for many years, but it was certain that he was one of the top combatants in the human world in Shiya. The second reason was that he had lived for a long time. If Luoya remembered correctly, this white-bearded old man should be around 400 years old this year, which was quite old among the existing extraordinaires. Although an extraordinaire's lifespan would continue to increase as their bodies mutated, in fact, the increase in lifespan of low-level extraordinaires was limited. High-level extraordinaires, on the other hand, had to shoulder a lot of social responsibilities, especially in the past few hundred years when the human world was in turmoil. Many high-level extraordinaires had died on the battlefield of the mutants' westward invasion. In a war, the most important thing was money and manpower. As the largest training base for human talents, the Kingdom of Scholars naturally couldn't afford to lose. Although there were many extraordinaires in each school, the proportion of those who could actually fight on the battlefield was not high. Therefore, after several wars, the Kingdom of Scholars had the most surviving extraordinaires. As a human powerhouse, Antonio had also fought on the battlefield during the last racial war and achieved very good results. However, as the saying went, there were internal and external troubles. Every time there was chaos, the shortcomings of the Kingdom of Scholars would be exposed. There would always be some people who would jump out and cause trouble. Antonio had no choice but to lead people to pacify the internal situation and stabilize the foundation. This way, his position would naturally be less dangerous. As one grew older, one's seniority would be higher. However, as the speaker of the Kingdom of Scholars, although old, Antonio was very close to the people. For many years, his support among the people had been very high. During his tenure as the headmaster of the academy, he had repeatedly encouraged the students to strengthen their autonomy and advocated for dogmatism. Therefore, he was also very popular among the students. With such a figure on the stage, the students below would more or less cooperate with him. Under the attention of the crowd, Antonio, the headmaster of the academy, began his speech. However, the theme of Antonio's speech was unexpectedly not some chicken blood injection. Instead, it was a little heavy. The responsibility of growth. This was the theme of Antonio's speech. Dear students, the moment you stepped into this auditorium, it means that you have become the pride of the world, ahead of most of your peers in the human world. In the next few years, the gap between you and the outside world will only grow bigger and bigger. You can cheer and be proud, but don't forget one thing. When you are at the top of the human race, the pressure that the race shares on you will become sharper and heavier. As students of St. Freya Academy, I hope that you will not only grow in strength, but also in your sense of responsibility. The source substance gives us strength and lets us know which direction to work towards. However, since ancient times, there have been an endless number of fallen people. Why are there so many people who have gone astray in the same direction? Because they often pursue their own interests. When they take risks out of desperation, they forget about their family, forget about their country, and forget about the human situation. When responsibility is covered in dust, indulgence blinds their minds and leads them to destruction. Listening to Antonio's speech, the young man's expression gradually became serious. To be honest, Luoya felt that this speech was more suitable for graduation. After all, most of these new students had just stepped out of their comfort zone. In many of their eyes, the world was still bright and beautiful. Not to mention fallen people and evil cultists, these young masters and young ladies had probably not even seen a criminal before. Not everyone was like Luoya, who was watched by evil cultists from a young age and constantly moved forward through trials of life and death. In the end, these words were still a little too early for most people at this age. However, as an educator, Antonio should be very clear about these things. So why did he still say it? The deeper meaning behind it. Luo Ya's golden pupils slightly narrowed as he silently pondered. Chapter 245. Based on the current situation, the Shi Ya country that Luo Ya was in was relatively peaceful. Although the situation between the small countries changed from time to time, the relationship between the big countries was still stable. Therefore, in this era, the freshman who had just reached adulthood had not seen much bloodshed. In fact, if it weren't for his bloodline, Luo Ya himself wouldn't have seen any war. This showed the importance of the bloodline of the Akut family. Awakening and not awakening were two completely different paths, and the endpoint was probably as different as heaven and earth. In this aspect, the Heathcote family was better. Thinking of this, Luo Ya couldn't help but sigh. Nuo Arya's strength was reasonable. After all, not all the royal families dared to send their heirs to the front line, let alone really fight the monsters. According to Luo Ya's guess, in the years after the problems on the Eastern Front, Nuo Arya should have more combat experience than him, or at least more combat experience than him. On the other hand, Luo Ya's advantage was the kind of battles that hovered between life and death. One focused on quantity, while the other focused on quality. It could only be said that each had its own advantages. As for setting his sights on the human race and assuming his own responsibilities, if he didn't know about the existence of the 6 disasters, perhaps Luo Ya wouldn't have thought about it. It could only be said that different experiences led to different perceptions. Although Dean Antonio's words were profound, they didn't feel real to the freshman present. The old man must have a purpose for saying these things in advance, and it wasn't difficult for Luo Ya to guess the purpose. It was probably to prepare for the war with the aliens. But if that's the case, does it mean that Dean Antonio is not optimistic about the situation on the front line? Does he know something that others don't, or is he just saying it as a precaution? A deeper layer of thinking made Luo Ya frown. While the teenager was thinking, the white-haired old man also finished his speech and walked off the stage in the warmest applause of the audience. The dean's words seemed to have a deeper meaning. Nuo Arya, who had been on the front lines for quite some time, noticed something different. On the other side, Xia Luote, who had witnessed the 6 calamities, together with Luo Ya, had a complicated expression on her face. Indeed, but most of the people here don't understand. It was rare for the reddish-brown-haired girl to agree with her love rival. Her emerald eyes swept across the entire place, and she couldn't help but smile bitterly when she saw the brilliant smiles on the freshmen's faces. Luo Ya listened to the words of the 2 girls and didn't say anything. As time passed, the applause gradually subsided and a new figure walked onto the stage. The moment she appeared, the audience fell into complete silence. It was a girl with long black hair wearing a dark military uniform. Her top was buttoned with golden tassels, and her slender waist was wrapped by a leather belt. Her legs were wrapped in black stockings under a short skirt that didn't reach her knees for ease of movement. A small cloak with a standing collar fluttered behind her. It was a sharp contrast with her body that was outlined by the military uniform. However, the temperament of the young girl did not match her attire. Her regular facial features carried a faint coldness, and her deep purple eyes were filled with mystery as if they contained infinite wisdom. On her right hand, there was an exquisite and small ring in the shape of a blossoming rose, with an amethyst gem embedded in the center, reflecting the brilliance of the young girl's eyes. Lillian Ackman, this was the girl's name, and also the name of the ring-bearer who was currently in charge of this academy. As soon as she appeared, she attracted everyone's attention and immediately made the freshmen clamor. Who is that person? What a beautiful senior, it's Her Royal Highness. It had to be said that even Shi Ya was still universal when it came to judging a person's appearance. Lillian's temperament as an ice beauty was so compatible with the military uniform that many people had a good impression of her at first sight. The students whispered to each other endlessly. Even Luo Ya, who was full of vigilance against her, couldn't help but admire her in his heart. She was indeed beautiful. Normally, as an Austin aristocrat, Lillian would not wear a short skirt. The reason why she appeared on the stage in this dress was actually that this was not a military uniform, but the uniform of St. Freya Academy's security department. As a public security department, the Academy's security department was likely to fight during the course of duty. Girls' long skirts naturally couldn't be worn at this time, so they imitated the female military uniforms of various countries to design a uniform. Of course, as the uniform of the security department, its role was not only beautiful but also good protection. It could already be regarded as a curse vessel. The security department was rich, but all this was based on the premise that they had a strong leader. At this time, Lillian was also speaking on the stage as a student representative. St. Freya Academy's Rose Council speaker, head of the Academy's security department, Lillian Ackman. As a student representative, I represent all the students to welcome the new batch of students who are about to enter the school. Compared with Antonio's previous speech, Lillian's speech was quite ordinary. It was the same old speech of a normal opening ceremony. However, for the freshmen, Lillian's words were easier to understand, and the beautiful seniors' welcome was indeed easy to make a good impression on them. Of course, this kind of good impression did not exist near Luo Ya. Looking at the girl under the spotlight in front of her, the blonde angel's expression was cold, and her blue eyes were alert and vigilant. The previous confrontation between Lillian and Luo Ya in the square made Nuo Arya feel uneasy. On the other side, although the brown-haired elf lady did not catch the confrontation scene, because of the national enmity, she did not have a good impression of the Austin royalty. Perhaps the atmosphere here was too different from the surroundings. During the speech, Lillian's eyes stopped here more than once. When she saw Luo Ya's seat, she couldn't help but squint slightly. Normally, as a subordinate of Nuo Arya, Luo Ya should sit on the left side of Nuo Arya, but now he was sandwiched between Nuo Arya and Xia Luote. This position had already explained many things. It seemed that the information was wrong. In this situation, instead of saying that he was two-timing, it was better to say that he was being fought over. Lillian's purple eyes swept over the situation on Luo Ya's side, but then a question arose in her heart. Why did this happen? Normally, even if the heirs of two countries fell in love with the same person, they wouldn't fight so openly. Was it a dispute of personal feelings? Or did the Ackett family have something that they must obtain? Lillian, who had never experienced such intense feelings, couldn't understand the two girls. However, this did not affect her judgment of Luo Ya's power. Judging from the current situation, he actually had the support of both the theocracy and Luo Kia, which was rare even in the hundreds of years of St. Freya Academy's history. Chapter 246. Enchanted Night. This was a term that everyone in St. Freya Academy knew. It was also the first gift that every freshman received after entering the academy. It represented opportunities and challenges, and performing well on Enchanted Night was also the goal of many students before they entered the academy. Although the name sounded scary, Enchanted Night was actually the first night that students spent in the academy. However, it was different due to the guidance elves in the curse vessel in their hands. Guidance elves, also known as little elves, were a kind of intelligent life inherited from ancient times. They were called elves, but in fact, this kind of elves did not have a specific appearance or gender. They were more like a kind of curse power with a certain level of self-consciousness. There were different opinions about the birth of little elves. Some people thought that it was a product of nature, and some said that it was the creation of some great existence. There was no specific conclusion so far. However, it was not important to most people how it came to be. They only cared about what it was used for. The guiding elves themselves were not very useful, and they were completely harmless. In most cases, they would be seen as fireflies. However, in the Kingdom of Scholars, guiding elves were highly valued because they were often the key to guiding others into the Hidden Realm. The Hidden Realm was a unique situation in the country of scholars. No one knew where it was located. Only by following the guidance elves could one enter. However, it was more similar to the concept of divinity or shuttling in Luo Ya's previous life. The guidance elves would only guide one person into the hidden realm each time. It was kind of exclusive. As a creation of curse power, they were very sensitive to the different types of curse power between people. Therefore, there was no possibility of sneaking in. The people who were guided would often disappear in a flash, and no one could follow them. The establishment of the country of scholars could be said to be due to the variety of hidden realms and ancient ruins nearby. In this area of the academy, there was a famous hidden realm, Enchanted Night. Enchanted Night could only be entered once, and it could only be entered at night. It was one of the rare hidden realms that was harmless. It was similar to a dreamlike hidden realm that mixed illusion and reality. The damage suffered in it would disappear when one returned to reality. This characteristic made it very popular among the educators in the academy. It could let the young masters and young mistresses, who had just left the protection of their families, experience the cruelty of actual combat, and could prevent them from suffering any substantial injuries as soon as they entered the school. Moreover, it did not require any manpower or material resources. The affordable cafeteria was destined to be a place where Nuo Arya and Xia Luote couldn't come. It was not because the two were delicate. In fact, Nuo Arya had eaten military food on the Eastern Front. It obviously didn't taste good. When Xia Luote was in the Golden Ship crew, she was also very friendly in the face of seafaring food. The real reason why they couldn't come was the impact of their status. Her Royal Highness and Miss ate in the affordable cafeteria. How could the underlings go to a high-end restaurant? Obviously, any underling with a little brain would not do so. The final result could only be hundreds of people from both sides crowded in the civilian cafeteria, leaving those who really needed affordable food without food. Tasting the tender chicken cooked in his mouth, the black-haired young man nodded slightly while taking out the pendant in front of his chest. He looked at the curse vessel named Steel Amber and fell into deep thought. In addition to the flag, Roher didn't forget his other important purpose. The Entcade did say that the Sage of the Twilight was in St. Freya's College. If he is still alive, he will see the Steel Amber, whether it is good or bad, he will take action. What a beautiful pendant. Heh! The sudden praise made Luo Ye couldn't help but raise his head. He found that a red-haired woman had sat down across the table with a plate of food. She narrowed her light blue eyes and smiled at him meaningfully. Good afternoon, are you Luo Ye Akate? Chapter 247. On both sides of the dining table in St. Freya Academy's cafeteria, there was a pair of good-looking people looking at each other. One of them was a handsome black-haired young man, his golden pupils revealing a little confusion. The other was a tall red-haired beauty, her light blue eyes full of unknown emotions. The age gap between the two seemed to be about 10 years. It was a perfect combination of a big sister and a young man. If the two of them were to appear in a movie or TV series in his previous life, it would probably cause quite a lot of people to think about them. In fact, there were indeed a lot of students who noticed this rare combination on campus and cast their gazes over. Under the curious gaze of the crowd, Luo Ye held the steel amber pendant in his hand and blinked at the woman opposite him. For a moment, he couldn't react. What's going on? I just took it out, and someone is already looking for it. Is this person the scholar? No, that's impossible. Luo Ye observed the beautiful big sister opposite him and shook his head slowly in his heart. The issue of age wasn't a big deal. After all, the age and appearance of transcendents generally didn't match, especially women, but the difference in behavior was too big. According to Y. Elizabeth's description, the scholar was a very cautious person. After joining the association for many years, she hadn't revealed her identity. Although the Twilight Sage Association had disappeared for hundreds of years, there was no reason for her to be so rash as to approach Luo Ye as soon as he took out the token. Or rather, if she was the scholar, she might temporarily stay away from him. Then, could it be another member? Or a descendant of another member? Thinking of this, Luo Ye's eyes lit up. He nodded with a smile on his face. Yes, I'm Luo Ye, Ackett. May I ask who you are? My name is Chris Worth, a teacher here. I see. Hello, teacher Chris. May I ask what's the matter? It's nothing. I just found out that I have some connections with you. We have some common acquaintances, so I came to talk to you. The red-haired beauty said so. She held a fork in her hand and pointed at the plate in front of her. On the other side, Luo Ye was shocked. Connections? Common acquaintances? Is it the scholar? No, wait, from the way she saw Iron Amber talking to him, could it be that she knew Cade? So Cade did say that a woman had come to him a month before Luo Ye went to Cairn Forest. Could that person be the teacher in front of him? Did he really encounter a descendant of the Twilight Sage Society? Luo Ye became excited as she thought of this. On the other side, Chris was still maintaining his elegant smile. Chris Worth, 36 years old this year, was the only son of the University of Bologna family. He graduated from St. Freya Academy 18 years ago, and since then, he had stayed in the school as a teacher. Because of his superb strength, huge connections, and far superior teaching results, he became one of the few sage mentors in the academy at the age of 30. Outstanding ability, a good family background, coupled with seductive beauty and sexy figure, the number of men pursuing Chris could form a strong company after so many years. However, she was still unmarried. It was rumored that she couldn't forget her former senior, and in fact, that was indeed the case. Ka Ackett was Chris' former senior, and also the person who changed her life. People today probably couldn't imagine that Chris, the youngest sage mentor in history, was once a rebellious girl when she first entered the academy. Her rebellion against her family made her full of disgust for this place, until a senior became her partner. In St. Freya Academy, it was normal for students under the same mentor to help each other. Among them, the most common pattern was for outstanding senior students to form a partnership with unsatisfactory junior students. Chris's partner was Ka, but unlike other partners who only worked on the surface, Ka was very serious and responsible, constantly persuading Chris to return to the right path. In the process, the two inevitably had a lot of contact and conflict, and Chris's emotions constantly changed over time, from resistance and disgust to being moved, and finally falling in love. Chris was already very talented, and in order to gain the admiration of her sweetheart, she worked even harder. Her grades and strength soared like a rocket, but unfortunately, this feeling was destined to be unreciprocated. Ka fell in love with Luo Ye's mother, and because of this, he even cut off all contact with Chris and said very heartless words. After graduation, the two returned to Leinster and got married. After Ka graduated, Chris tried hard and struggled, but she couldn't forget this feeling in her heart. She started to hate Ka for being so heartless. However, as the saying goes, where there are gains, there are losses. In order to make up for the pain in her heart, Chris spent all her time improving her strength and training students. This was how she became a sage mentor at a young age and waited until Luo Ye entered the academy. The person I'm talking about, do you know who it is? With a smile on her face, Chris waited for Luo Ye to ask questions, ready to give him a surprise. However, she didn't expect Luo Ye to nod after cautiously scanning the surroundings. He knows. Chris looked at the calm Luo Ye and blinked. She didn't know where he heard it from. After thinking for a while, the red-haired woman asked hesitantly, could it be, he mentioned me to you? Of course he did. Luo Ye recalled Cade's words in Cairn Forest and nodded firmly. What he said made Chris's heart skip a beat. Chapter 248. There are strange fluctuations in the secret realm recently. On the other side of the table, the black-haired teenager was stunned when he heard the red-haired woman's words. He couldn't help but recall the plot of Recorder's Eye in his previous life. He blinked with a puzzled expression. In Roha's previous life, the game was like a prophecy book. Now, he almost summed up a rule, that is, if you don't interfere too much, then some of the plots in the game have a high probability of repeating in reality. Of course, as Luo Ye entered the academy, the reference value of the prophecy book recorder's eye would definitely decrease. In fact, it was basically ineffective now in the heroine aspect. However, in the entrance ceremony, it should still be able to play its original function. However, the recent instability of the secret realm was not mentioned in the game. This is for you. The lamp oil of the Lamp of Finding is a safety device. Ignite it and follow its guidance. It will take you out of the secret realm. The red-haired woman took out a finger-sized bottle and handed it to Luo Ya as she spoke. The teenager reached out and took a closer look. He found that it was a wooden cylinder-like curse vessel. Judging from the touch, it was indeed liquid inside. After giving the props, Chris left a few words of advice and left. As a teacher in the academy, her behavior was actually on the verge of violating the rules. Naturally, she couldn't continue to attract others' attention here. Looking at the red-haired woman's back, the black-haired teenager couldn't help but sigh. This descendant of the Sage Society was truly a passionate person. It seemed that his ancestor was an old friend of Cade's. Perhaps he had even left some words on the Tyrant. He was so happy when he heard that he could contact Cade. However, he left too quickly. He didn't even have the time to ask about the scholar. Luo Ya looked at the lamp oil in his hand and could only regret being distracted. However, considering that both of them were in the academy, it was not urgent to ask about the scholar. Now, the opening ceremony was even more strange. While eating and playing with the pencil-sized wooden cylinder in his hand, Luo Ya thought for a while and felt that it was nothing. During the opening ceremony in the game, Paul was only at source level 5 just like in reality. He didn't have any cheats, so he was quickly eliminated. Moreover, there were no acquaintances in the academy. Maybe there were fluctuations in the secret realm in the game, but Paul's level was too low to reach it. And even if there were, so what? How could a mystic realm be more dangerous than a historical fragment? Thinking of this, Luo Ya shook her head. She put away the small wooden cylinder and left the cafeteria. She began to wander around the campus with the guide elf. There were still a few hours before Devil's Night, and the academy was filled with students wandering around with small balls in their hands. Not everyone was successful in pleasing the little elves. In fact, most of the elves in their hands were still very cold, but Luo Ya was an exception. At this time, beside the black-haired boy, the guide sprite was flying around with the heavy curse vessel shell. It circled around him intimately, surprising many students along the way. They came forward to ask for advice, which gave Luo Ya a headache. Would you believe me if I said I didn't do anything? Luo Ya dealt with the distressed students. Looking at this lively little thing, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He also felt a little strange. Luo Ya remembered that Paul spent the whole afternoon coaxing this little thing. Originally, Luo Ya was also prepared for a long war, but he didn't expect that the situation would become like this soon after the curse power touched it. Is it because of the source substance? Crown, source substance has the talent of training? The black-haired boy who couldn't figure it out shook his head. In any case, it was a good thing to familiarize himself with the guide elf as soon as possible. After saving a lot of time, Luo Ya didn't stay idle. Instead, he walked in the direction of the white building when he entered the school gate. Luo Ya was not an amnesiac. He naturally wouldn't forget such an incredible thing like resonance reaction. It was necessary to explore it as soon as he had time. The boy even had an inexplicable feeling of being caught in the act. The bloodline of the Akate family was exclusive. The most likely to resonate was naturally a blood relative. In fact, Luo Ya had begun to wonder if his father couldn't control himself when he was in the academy, and he accidentally left an illegitimate child or something. It was very melodramatic, but in theory, it wasn't impossible. The vigilant Luo Ya came all the way here, intending to ask about the situation here. But what he didn't expect was that this building was just an empty building with no specific purpose. According to the management here, because this building was close to the school gate and other places, it was generally fought over by various schools and organizations. After the opening season, the building would be empty again. St. Freya Academy covered a vast area, quite similar to the National Forest Park in Luo Ye's previous life. In addition to the well-maintained central campus, there were also many buildings built with donations from individuals over the past 900 years of the school's establishment. Some nobles even spent money to build houses specifically for living. Therefore, the situation of empty buildings was not uncommon, even serious. About an hour before the opening ceremony, who was here? There should be more students from the school's security department at that time. Of course, there were also many people from the school. Hearing Luo Ye's question, the black-haired boy fell into deep thought. When new students were admitted, the security department students would be dispatched in large numbers to maintain order. This was normal. But to be honest, Luo Ye didn't want to deal with this department. The reason was naturally because of Lillian. Looking for someone under the eyes of the Purple Rose was not an easy thing to do. It was likely that he would be regarded as having ulterior motives. And in the end, the school's reason for looking for relatives was very strange. Actually, I have a long-lost relative here. Guess how Lillian would answer this kind of nonsense? It was probably the princess's magnanimity that she didn't make a move. Luo Ye sighed and shook his head as he left. After walking a distance, he turned back to look at the building. He still couldn't feel at ease. After all, the Akate family was not prosperous, and there weren't many members. Chapter 249. When night fell, a crowd gathered at the edge of St. Freya Academy's misty forest. The noise made this gloomy place, which was rarely visited by the Academy's students, lively. The misty forest, as its name suggested, was filled with fog that contained curse power all year round. In this forest, it was difficult to distinguish directions using curse power, and one could not see the sun. Therefore, countless people had gone missing since ancient times. Therefore, the misty forest was listed as a forbidden area by the Academy. In fact, the misty forest was not only a part of St. Freya Academy. It was more accurate to say that this part of the Academy only accounted for about 10% of the total. The rest extended to the south of Leinster. Due to the extremely high concentration of magic elements, there were abundant resources. Every year, there were desperate adventurers who entered the forest hoping to get rich overnight. However, the result was often one more name added to the list of missing people. Of course, such a mysterious place naturally had some legends. For example, there was a shocking secret hidden in the forest. Such ghost stories might be a little attractive to others, but in Luo Ye's view, there was nothing to write home about. The reason why so many people gathered here now was that this was the entrance to the secret realm. As long as one had the help of a guide elf blessed by nature, it was still very safe to walk around the periphery of the misty forest. As for those who did not get the favor of the elf in these few hours, I can do it. Let me in. I've been preparing for a long time. Senior, give me another chance. Let me try again. In a corner outside the forest, a group of small balls of curse beasts flew around several mentors and students. Beside them was a group of students who were either begging or dejected. In order to verify that the students had the cooperation of the elves and would not go missing after entering the forest, the mentors and members of the security department would release a special curse at the entrance to attract the guide elves. Any elves who did not meet the requirements of the curse beasts would run away on the spot. It was like love. Without the guide elves, the students naturally could not enter the secret realm. They could only wait outside. Of course, there were occasionally some who were restless. It was said that there were stubborn students who wanted to barge in without the elves. As a result, their legs were broken before they could run into the forest. Don't worry, my dear. I will definitely get the ring and build our love nest here. Hehe, Miss Xia Luote, what are you talking about? Luo Ye is my subject, and I am his protector. After I get the ring, of course he should be by my side. Outside the forest, the blonde girl looked at the reddish-brown girl with a smile. She reached out and gently tugged on Luo Ye's tie as if declaring ownership. On the other side, Xia Luote also showed a kind smile. Indeed, if your highness obtains the ring, Luo Ya will probably join your faction. But does this have anything to do with me living with my dear? As a monarch, are you going to restrict the freedom of your subordinates? Is your highness such a tyrant? Xia Luote, you. The blonde girl listened to the young lady's words, and her eyes suddenly sharpened. The two looked at each other and did not give in. The black-haired boy sighed silently. He could only pray silently in his heart for the ritual to start quickly. As if hearing his wish, the concentration of magic element in the misty forest under the night began to gradually increase. The guide elves were also restless. It's starting. Yeah. The two girls and Luo Ya looked at each other. They nodded and separated from each other. They followed their guide elves into the forest. Luo Ya looked at the backs of the two girls until the fog gradually covered their figures. Then, it's up to you. Carefully opening the curse box, the little elf who heard Luo Ya's request flew up to the sky and then fell down. After circling the boy a few times, she flew toward the forest. Luo Ya followed closely. With the increase of steps, the concentration of the white fog in the boy's vision became higher and higher. When it reached a critical value, the surrounding scenery seemed to turn into a blank, and then suddenly changed and quickly dissipated. The vision went from blurred to white for about a few hundred meters, but from white to clear was only a dozen steps. Luo Ya, who walked out of the fog, looked around and found that he was already in a forest surrounded by giant trees. Judging from the size and type of trees, it was obviously not the misty forest with twisted branches. It was more vibrant, and even Luo Ya suspected that it was in ancient times. After Luo Ya, more and more students followed the elves to this area. Due to the individual point system and the random allocation of the secret realm, most of the students did not know each other, and there was no idea of forming a team. After keeping a distance from each other, they prepared for battle. The silence in the forest lasted for a while until a wolf howl broke the silence of the night. Awoo! Under the moonlight, pairs of shining eyes began to gradually approach from the forest, and the number was increasing. It was a group of mutated demon wolves, and their strength was about source level 6. Their group was widely distributed in various areas of Shi Ya. It was the lowest level of demon. Except for the number, they had nothing to show. Under normal circumstances, their main opponent was the militia. At the moment when they saw such a group of monsters, there were many sighs of relief in the crowd. Generally, the freshmen who had reached source level 5 smiled happily as if they had seen victory. After all, the major dividing line of extraordinary strength was between source level 6 and source level 5. In the eyes of most students, source level 6 monsters were their lives to be killed indiscriminately. However, feeling the relaxed atmosphere nearby, Luo Ya's face became strange. He looked around and found that several students wearing armor also frowned. It seemed that the elimination speed of this opening ceremony was faster than expected. Luo Ya shook his head helplessly, walked to a position with his back against a boulder, and burned a faint curse power on his body. Tonight, St. Freya Academy was a lively night. The reason for the liveliness was not only because the freshmen accepted the baptism of the entrance ceremony, but also because of the situation outside the arena at this time. In the big arena in the academy, it could be said that it was full of people at this time. The senior students were excitedly looking at the projection of the curse vessel on the field, sometimes applauding and sometimes despising. But now they were not watching the battle of the top 20 students, but the first-person perspective of the visual tracking elves in the entrance ceremony. Yes, this was a broadcast, and it was also one of the most popular activities in the academy every year. Chapter 250. On the viewing platform, Lillian listened to Grimm's words and remained unmoved. Her silence was like encouragement in the eyes of the young man. As a pureblood aristocrat, Grimm had been educated since he was a child that the purity of the bloodline was nobility. The royal family was the best in this regard, especially the gifted Her Royal Highness. Under the 3 halos of appearance, intelligence, and bloodline, She could be said to be the only goddess in the hearts of Grimm's generation. However, even though Princess Lillian was good, she had a flaw. She was too cold, as if she did not care about anything. Even when Grimm obtained another rose ring for the Austen Empire last year, it did not cause her to feel too much of a stir. However, such an icy beauty had paid special attention to two freshmen this year. One was Paul Aikman, and the other was Luo Ya, Ackett, who was in the middle of a battle. Although Grimm hated Paul's situation, he could understand it. After all, he had the bloodline of Aikman. Even if he was not a pureblood, he should be taken care of. However, Grimm could not tolerate Luo Ya's situation. How could an indigenous barbarian of the Saint Maister theocracy make Her Royal Highness look at him differently? He's just a freshman with an ancient curse vessel. There's nothing special about him. I heard about Carlo and the others. This freshman didn't do it himself, right? Grimm looked at Luo Ya with a glass of wine and couldn't help but smile when he looked at his empty hands. It's a pity that this kind of curse vessel that can attack autonomously is prohibited in the secret mirror. Without that trump card, he will become immortal again. In the eyes of the first-year students, Luo Ya was the one upholding justice. In the eyes of the second-year students, Grimm was the one who stood up for his seniors. The inherent superiority of the Austen Empire made him full of prejudice. However, all of this was so naive in Lillian's eyes, even a little ridiculous. As a member of the Austen Empire's royal family, Lillian's identity made it necessary for her to acknowledge the pureblood theory. But deep down, she was actually skeptical of this theory of unknown origin. As for why she treated Luo Ya differently, it was actually based on the suppression of the curse power back then. As a matter of fact, Lillian wanted to give Luo Ya, who was approaching Paul, a warning. Lillian's coercion wasn't something that could be brushed off with a smile. With the difference in level, even Green would be crushed by her. But what she didn't expect was that Luo Ya actually stood her ground calmly. During that short period of coercion, Lillian also discovered something unusual. Although it was only for an instant, Lillian felt as though something in the young man's body was watching her. It was an existence that even she had to pay attention to, which was why she was so wary of Luo Ya. Arrogance and prejudice can make people careless. Lillian reminded Grimm in response to his evaluation. Her purple eyes stared at the youth's position in the distant image, before she added after a moment. Furthermore, he probably already knew about the strangeness of those trees. How ferocious were wolves? In fact, Luo Ya didn't know much about them in her previous life. Or rather, most wild animals were unfamiliar to humans living in modern cities. Knowing their appearances and races was almost the limit of popular science knowledge. Luo Ya truly understood these animals in Shi Ya. To be more specific, it was during the period of acting overlord. The reason was simple. The areas with wolf pack activities needed to be specially marked and avoided as much as possible during construction. Demonic wolves were the nightmares of overlords, far more troublesome than bandits. In fact, Luo Ya would rather have a level 4 source class monster in her territory than a level 6 source class demonic wolf pack. A level 4 source class monster could be dealt with in less than a month with a level 4 source class elite team. But if these people were to deal with the wolves, Luo Ya only hoped that they would return in one piece instead of disappearing altogether. However, it was a pity that Luo Ya had fought with these things as an overlord, but most of the other students' understanding was a little lacking. At this time, in the forest surrounded by giant trees, the chaotic battle had already lasted for more than 10 minutes. The number of students had been greatly reduced. Let go. Damn it. Let. Another student was bitten by a demonic wolf that had died in battle and died in the mouth of the wolf. Before he died, the youth's body disappeared like mist, leaving behind only the guiding spirits to absorb the curse power that flowed out of the dead demonic beasts. These little things only absorbed the demonic beasts killed by their masters. The more they absorbed, the brighter the light became. At this time, the number of wolves and humans on the battlefield had been greatly reduced. Most of the demonic beasts that were still fighting grew from fireflies to lights. A few of them even turned into light bulbs. However, The guiding spirits beside the black-haired youth did not change at all. After another demonic wolf that had taken the initiative to rush over was smashed into meat paste with a bone claw, Luo-Ya, who had been defending and counterattacking, raised his head and silently scanned the surroundings. However, unlike the others who were observing the ground, the black-haired youth was looking at the sky. His golden pupils stared at the towering trees in the vicinity, feeling the gradually increasing concentration of magic in the air. He muttered to himself, "It should be about time." As soon as the youth's voice fell, the forest suddenly began to inexplicably shake. Before the humans and the demonic beasts that were in the midst of fighting could react, a sudden change suddenly befell everyone's head. Roar! In the midst of the hoarse and unpleasant strange roar, the sky and earth shook, and the horn of massacre was blown. Violent fluctuations of curse power suddenly came from the trees that the students were leaning against. Giant malicious faces appeared on the trees, and then the branches of the giant trees condensed. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 gigantic trees fell from the sky and hammered the ground. After a long period of observation, the brightest elves in the field had already been locked onto by these terrifying Tyrants. And under this thunderous attack, the group of students who performed the best was instantly smashed into pieces, tragically annihilated. In the midst of the screams and the sound of flesh and blood exploding, the Trent's mouth curled up strangely, as if they were laughing at the stupidity of the humans. However, what they did not see was that in the corner that they ignored, the black-haired youth's mouth also curled up. Amidst the soundless laughter, the lightning and fire formed by the power of the curse swirled around his body and finally turned into a crimson-red light. An ancient giant shadow appeared in the exploding fog, and at the same time, the meteorite-like fist appeared. Boom! In the midst of the explosion of the trees, Luo-Ya's silent guiding spirit light began to rapidly expand, and under the light, the black-haired youth looked up at the dull Tyrants and revealed a smile. "Stop pretending, I'll lay my cards on the table." Chapter 251. Oh! In the arena, as the Gulandea smashed the tree with his meteorite, the audience cheered enthusiastically, attracting more and more people's attention. The great tree forest was a pain that most of the students in St. Freya Academy couldn't forget. Many senior students would gnash their teeth at the mention of this place. Compared to its plain name, people preferred to describe it as the Nightmare Forest because it was full of malice. When the students entered the forest, the entire forest seemed peaceful, but in fact, the first batch of monsters had already arrived. They were the evil Tyrants that disguised themselves as trees nearby. What was more infuriating was that these Tyrants didn't attack immediately, but instead, they would scout. They would drive packs of wolves to battle with the students, and through their performance in battle, they would lock onto the stronger students in advance and launch a saturation attack in the second half of the battle. As the saying went, a man proposes but a tree disposes. In other secret realms, the more courageous the students were, the more they would reap. But in the great tree forest, the better they performed, the faster they would die. It was completely against human design. After the human leader was struck by lightning, the remaining students would be powerless even if they banded together. That was why in the great tree forest, they would basically be wiped out every time. However, what was unexpected was that this year, human intelligence had once again occupied the high ground. What was more exciting was the young man who saw through the treacherous plan and the terrifying skeletal giant. The instant the skeletal giant broke the giant tree, everyone's gaze changed. He can win. He might even win. Go. Avenge us. The cheers from the audience continued. Above the crowd, Grimm's face had turned as green as a ring. Being humiliated in front of Lillian made this young ring-bearer feel terrible. But at this moment, Her Royal Highness had no time to care about him. That is, staring at the Gulandeus body, Lillian's emotionless face revealed a rare expression. Her purple eyes widened and she couldn't help but stand up. But Lillian's shock wasn't only for the Gulandea. After all, she had sensed the strange presence before and had guessed it. She was truly shocked by the way the black-haired young man's curse power manifested. This is the creation type. Like me. The black-haired girl couldn't hide the surprise in her heart. As the Gulandea's actions became more and more certain of her judgment, questions began to appear in her heart one after another. Could this be the reason why Lucas forbade her from touching Luo-Ya? Or was it just a coincidence? Although the information about Luo-Ya's extraordinary ability was mostly blank, his father, Ka-Dia, was clear. He was not a creation type, and the forbidden contact with the Akut family also included Ka-Dia, so it had nothing to do with this. While Lillian was speculating all sorts of possibilities in her mind, on the other side, Luo-Ya was going all out. Tyrants. To the people of this era, this was probably a race that no one knew anything about. However, Luo-Ya was very familiar with them. After all, there was one planted in his house. During the days when he was transporting Cade, Luo-Ya had chatted with him many times. Just like the holy beasts, the Tyrants were divided into two types. The Tyrants who possessed the origin substance were intelligent and kind, while the Tyrants who didn't possess the origin substance were evil and cunning. Moreover, they were extremely thick and liked to incite the creatures around them to kill and absorb their flesh and blood. They would also ambush the strong in battle and put on a show of wanting to take them all. Not long after entering this place, Luo-Ya discovered a large number of skeletons under the roots of the nearby trees. The familiar feeling of curse power made him certain that there were Tyrants nearby, but he couldn't tell how many of them there were. Now that the enemy had jumped out, Luo-Ya could finally show his skills. In the year since Luo-Ya reached level 4 of source rank, he didn't have many opportunities to use his full strength. Now that enemies were everywhere, and the screams of the freshmen were endless, Luo-Ya, who was wrapped in curse power, no longer had any worries. The Gulandea attacked again in the shockwave of magic essence. Unlike the cautious Luo-Ya, the Tyrants were obviously careless. They thought that victory was already decided and didn't pull out the roots that were used as their legs. The immobile Tyrants were the targets, and the punching giant was the giant. The moment this combination met, the outcome was basically decided. Boom! Another loud explosion resounded through the forest. The curse power on the white bone fist of the Gulandea burned like fire, and when he waved it, it was as if his body was accompanied by wind and thunder. The huge body of the level 4 source rank Tyrant was just a slightly thicker cardboard in his eyes. The moment his fist touched the tree, it was like a bullet piercing through it, followed by the explosion of countless wood shavings. But even if they were weak, the Tyrants didn't give up resisting. Their huge branches waved, and there were countless air-piercing sounds in the forest every second. A large number of evil Tyrants wanted to entangle the giant's body. Their roots broke out of the ground one after another, looking for a chance to counterattack. The battle between the giants and the Tyrants began. The forest of giant trees shook as the two sides fought. The surviving students looked up at the battle above their heads and trembled. This scene was like a myth, and it was obviously beyond their understanding of the opening ceremony. In the arena outside the secret realm, the atmosphere had reached its climax. This boxing match like live broadcast stirred up the emotions of everyone present. Every time the Gulandea knocked down a Tyrant, it was a celebratory cheer. Everyone, the name of the new student has been found. Luo-Ya Akut, let us send encouragement to the warrior who punishes the evil Tyrant. Oh, Luo-Ya, Luo-Ya, Luo-Ya. The host of the publicity department worked overtime at the last minute and shouted loudly. What followed was a tsunami of responses. The hot-blooded youths who imitated the movements of the Gulandea raised their arms high, and the number of students shouting Luo Ya's name increased. Hurry up and change the odds. Hurry up and change the odds. Looking at the screen, the banker's face turned ashen. The odds for Roher Akate in the list of candidates began to drop rapidly, but even so, there was still an endless stream of people buying. The students raised their gold coins and placed their bets, boldly spending a lot of money. Spells and fireworks rose into the sky to liven things up, and the gorgeous light illuminated the faces of many teachers and students above the audience. On the rooftop, Chris laughed loudly, holding a cigarette and waving his fist. Chapter 252. What was the most important thing in a one-on-one duel? Equipment and tactics were undoubtedly very important, but if Luo Ya had to choose one of the many conditions, then he would choose attributes. It was not the wind, fire, and thunder attributes that restrained the attributes. The world of Shi Ya was real, not a game. The extraordinaires had a variety of curses, and as the degree of mutation deepened, more or less there would be a physical bonus. Their battles with each other were not just about making fireballs, but often ever-changing. There was no such thing as a weak extraordinaire. Even the group of semi-disabled people from the puppet school who couldn't move by themselves were more than enough to fight a tiger empty-handed. Luo Ya's attribute restraint was more inclined to the restraint of position, such as the current situation. Boom! A huge roar echoed in the open space in the woods. The fist of the huge skeleton collided with the lance and rolled up a whirlwind. The broken leaves and branches rushed into the sky, but before they fell to the ground, they were once again swept up by the shockwave. The black-haired boy stood on the ground at this time, looking at the armor on the opposite side. He couldn't see the specific appearance, but it was obviously a knight's extraordinaire phantom. He was uninterested and didn't even bother to move. Roderick Osborne. This was the armored man that Luo Ya saw through the skill, the former ringbearer phantom. There was no doubt that Luo Ya's luck was relatively good. He met a strength-type ringbearer, and to some extent, this type of physical attack was what he was best at dealing with. The fierce confrontation shook the forest, and the earth on the ground began to shatter and disintegrate. After dozens of rounds, the huge skeleton and the knight were evenly matched. Luo Ya observed the other side and carefully analyzed for a long time. He had almost evaluated the strength of the other side. The battle of extraordinaires wasn't about piling up attributes. If curses were weapons and curses were bullets, then the most important thing was undoubtedly the person who used the weapon. If the person was stupid, everything else was in vain. Perhaps he found that he couldn't defeat Luo Ya under the protection of the Gulan Dea. The tall knight pointed his lance forward, and destructive curses began to gather. It wasn't until this moment that the black-haired boy's golden pupils suddenly shrank, and at the same time, his face suddenly became strange. Should I say that those who can become ring-bearers have some ability? Hehe, interesting. Luo Ya muttered to himself, and Gulan Dea beside him also agreed. The black-haired teenager stared at the heavily armored man opposite him, and his heart was in turmoil. You're dressed like this, and you're actually playing a game? That's right. Although Luo Ya didn't know which era Roderick was a ringbearer, or his specific identity and background, there was one thing that Luo Ya was sure of, and that was his character. This was a cunning old fox. The heavy armor, the lance, and the tall physique were all feints. The speed at which the power of a large-scale spell was extracted was an important factor in determining whether a supernatural individual was more inclined towards spells or physical abilities. This ringbearer named Roderick had obviously undergone long-term training in this area. Perhaps even Luo Ya wouldn't be as efficient as him. This person's true identity should be a cursemancer of the Energy School. The Energy School was one of the oldest schools of thought. It emphasized on following the most basic destructive nature of each person's curse power, reducing the consumption of conversion, and pursuing the greatest power. To put it bluntly, it was the light cannon style. Condense and blast out. If there was no conversion, then there was no consumption. It was normal to be blasted to death, but if there wasn't enough power to blast to death, then it was normal. Of course, when it came to practical application, the energy faction had many secret manuals, and it was far from being as simple as one would imagine. For example, the famous technique, hidden collection, was an ultimate move that could be used to silently store up the curse power in the middle of a battle and suddenly release it. After all, it was impossible for other factions to secretly store up a big move while fighting. This person's physical ability should be brought about by his bloodline. Yes, a strengthening type bloodline user, and a rather powerful one at that. Gyulendaya gave a rare compliment. The next moment, the light of destruction suddenly erupted, and the beam of curse power broke through the distance of hundreds of meters with a rumbling sound. In the midst of the explosion, there was a loud explosion in the direction of the forest where Luo Ya was. In the scattered white light, the knight's movement stopped for a moment, but the next moment, he suddenly raised his head and looked up. Above the dim night sky, a golden light was shining in the starless sky. It crossed the sky and kept rising, moving directly above Roderick. It was the black-haired boy with irregular light wings on his back. Angel's Gift. This was one of the abilities that Luo Ya and Nuo Arya hatched together through the short blade of the Holy One a few years ago. It had the effect of dispelling negative statuses. Luo Ya often used it to neutralize the immortal state caused by summoning the Gyulendaya, but the other flying ability was rarely used. The whistling sound of the wind was ringing in his ears, and the rapidly falling temperature made Luo Ya's body feel slightly cold. The boy who slowed down looked back at the sky. At this time, Roderick's body had turned into a small dot. Luo Ya saw this and smiled slightly. The golden light around his body disappeared, and he turned into a red killing star. It's about time. I've been wanting to play like this for a long time. The boy chuckled. His body was pulled down by gravity, and at the same time, the blood-red light on his body extended and turned into a huge demon god. The mist was blown away by the wind, and the falling giant skeleton made a sound as it rubbed against the air. The red star turned into a meteor and fell from the sky. Under the huge shadow, Roderick's body moved again. He raised the light cannon on his lance again, but this time, the light beam could no longer threaten Luo Ya. The white bone fist was getting bigger and bigger in Roderick's vision. The explosive curse power and the huge potential energy shattered the golden light beam from the sky. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.